Good afternoon. Opening today's special meeting of the Santa Rosa City School Board, Wednesday, May 17th, 2023. At this time, I will take public comment on closed session agenda items only.
There are members of the public. If there are members of the public joining us on Zoom and would like to comment on our closed session agenda only, please raise your hand. Our first speaker is Adina Flores. How many minutes, President Manieri? 3 minutes, timer.
Good evening, Board and Superintendent. I'd like to speak on the closed session item for pending litigation with the district. As you're aware, I previously sent you a notice of intent to sue in which I'm requiring a response by end of day today. The parents of Bishop Unified School District just won a class action settlement against their district for $400,000. It was confirmed that under Title 21, as I've said almost every day, it was illegal to mandate any EUA COVID-19 tests, masks, or vaccines. You chose to violate the law and Constitution and mandate these requirements anyways. Mr. Sheffield and essentially every elected official within the county launched a smear campaign against my fiance and myself last week. Approximately a month ago, Mr. Sheffield posted a derogatory comment on his Twitter account in reference to conservative Black men. He captioned, "Nigga, please." When I brought this to light, he deleted his entire Twitter handle. When I reposted this onto the thread
We need
initiated.
to cut this public comment. I'm sorry. We can't have that kind of language in our meetings. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Shelby Pryor.
Good evening, Board. Well, I'll continue off where Ms. Flores went ahead and continued off there. Basically, Bishop School District has gone ahead and sued legitimately their school district. Anybody who's listening who wants to learn how we can go ahead and hold these people accountable, go ahead and please reach out to us. We absolutely 100% know that there is a case in California where they've gone ahead and sued successfully the school district and found cause to go ahead and go after these people for forcing you to be vaccinated. All the political rhetoric that they're trying to play at the moment is smokescreen for the fact that they're all about to be in trouble and they're all about to be held liable. And you can actually go after these people financially and individually for the wrongdoings that they have done to the community by forcing them to be vaccinated. That's one of many of the issues that we are facing right now. The fact that they pulled that student, the RSOs, out of the schools and put your children at harm, that's also an issue. The fact that they're only giving you options to go ahead and abide by certain things that they want to push because their leftist extreme ideas are going to continue to push. I don't want leftist extreme ideas or rightist extreme ideas. What I'd like to see is people work together, figure out how we can go ahead and fix this issue, and cutting people off in the middle of their conversation because you don't like something they have to say. Well, guess what? We're never going to get anything done if you guys keep going ahead and holding to your partisan politics. You continue to act like people are being aggressors, me specifically, for coming after you individuals on a level where you don't feel comfortable. You don't feel comfortable because the reality is that you've been sitting in your pulpit doing what you've been doing for so long, unchecked by anybody in the public. No one, and I mean no one, is oblivious to what has been going on. Things have been getting worse since you have been in charge. So therefore, check it out. Bishop School over in Eastern California, it is most definitely successfully sued and held liable the school districts for forcing EUA products. That's called an emergency use authorization product. It also means that these individuals forced your child to take a chemical that they didn't have to. Remember that. Every single one of them you see up there and you don't see, those people are liable. Those people put your children in harm's way. say that that's gonna be something that you can live with, because now you're gonna be in trouble for that. Wake up, people. We're gonna make it happen.
Thank you. President Manieri, there are no other hands raised.
Thank you. At this time, we will recess to closed session. Good afternoon. Thank you for attending today's special board meeting of the Santa Rosa City School Board. Opening this meeting Wednesday, May 17th, 2023. Before we begin, I'd like to report that no action was taken in closed session. And now if you would please join us for our land acknowledgement, if you would all stand, and if we could please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Santa Rosa City Schools acknowledges that the ground beneath our feet is historically the home of Indigenous peoples, many of whom have been forced to leave their lands. We sit on the traditional homelands of the people of Coast Miwok, Southern Pomo, and Wapo. We honor them and other Indigenous caretakers of these lands and waters, and remember that Indigenous peoples are not a people of the past, but are here with us now. And now, please join us in our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We are now opening our meeting up for public comment on agenda items only. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the board on only our agenda items. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes each.
There are members of the public joining us on Zoom and would like to comment on the agenda item only, which is the district-wide data presentation for Panorama Youth Truth and Discipline. Please raise your hand at this time. Our first speaker is Adina Flores.
Good evening, board and superintendent. I'm just curious as to why we're continually including the Youth Truth Survey on the agenda. I know that many parents have expressed concerns with the survey, being that the Youth Truth Survey is under the umbrella of, it's an initiative of the Center for Effective Philanthropy, which is owned by Bill Gates. And if you read the disclaimer and every little detail, such as I have, Mr. Bill Gates is data mining all of the information on our students, and you actually sold that information about all of our students to Bill Gates. So why he wants this information, I'm not sure, but being that he's pushing the COVID-19 inoculation, which is absolutely harmful onto the population, I don't think the best interests of our students are in mind. I would also like to remind this board, you violated the Brown Act today as you put the incorrect meeting time in the agenda and the virtual meeting link as well. So it seems that you were acting in non-transparency because you don't want people to be participating in these meetings. And Ms. Manieri, you did violate my First Amendment rights. So I just want to remind you of that. Thank you.
Thank you. President Manieri, there are no other hands raised.
Thank you. At this time, we will move on to our discussion item for this evening, the district-wide data presentation, Panorama Youth Truth and Discipline. The Board of Education will receive an update regarding the Panorama and the Youth Truth surveys. The Panorama Education Survey provides student and staff perception of their social, emotional learning and well-being. The Youth Truth Culture and Climate Survey provides data on students, families, and staff. In addition, the Board of Education will receive information on discipline data as reported in the district Student Information System, ARIES. And presenting this discussion item are Superintendent Trinell, Dr. Roger Castro, Dr. Emmanuel Bardelli, Director of Student and Family Engagement, Stacy Desideri, Coordinator of Student Family Engagement, Kesa Enmark, and Mental Health Clinical Supervisor, Eric Lofchi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, President Manieri, members of the board, those who are with us in person and online. Thank you for your time this evening as we present information on Panorama Youth Truth and Discipline patterns. At the request of the board, we are bringing back the discussion about Panorama and Youth Truth to give the conversation justice from a former board agendized item. And we are also adding a conversation tonight regarding our discipline patterns. If we could go to the next slide. So just grounding our work tonight. Are we good? Okay, I'm looking at your faces. So, okay. Grounding our work tonight in our mission and vision, really calling out our desire and our goal to support the whole student, which includes their social, emotional, and academic endeavors, as well as maintaining a safe environment for all. Who's advancing? Okay, thank you. All right, and then also just calling out our 7 priorities as a part of our strategic plan regarding life-ready learners, a whole person focus, having high-quality staff, teaching and learning environment and resources, equity and excellence, family engagement and community partnerships, and sustainable funding. The introduction of presenters has been taken care of this evening. Thank you to my colleagues for joining us tonight for this important discussion. So there are really 4 purposes for the information that we're presenting tonight. One is to honor the presentation that was originally provided to the board on March 29th of this year around Youth Truth Culture and Climate Survey and the Panorama Social Emotional Survey. So we're happy to bring that discussion back to you this evening. Also share a focus set of survey data around those 2 surveys that highlights some key trends between student and staff responses. We're also introducing discipline data patterns over years tonight to highlight trends in our suspension data in particular, and ultimately to make connections between the data as indicators of programmatic and policy development. The flow of tonight's presentation will start with information around Youth Truth data, followed by Panorama data, followed by discipline data and program and policy connections. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Anna Mark and Mr. Lopchi.
Good evening, everyone. Testing. Good evening, everyone. Seems to be a blue light. Thanks. You are likely familiar. Chairman, please. You're good. Yep. You are likely familiar with our SRCS, multi-tiered systems of support pyramid. The orange arrow here shows the Panorama survey, which is our safety net of sorts, enabling staff to identify students in need of additional support, as well as school-wide and district-wide trends that are visible in order to strategize and plan coordinated responses for improving SEL or social emotional learning skills, and also a sense of well-being, which we're all very curious about now. This is our universal screener. It's like a systematic approach to catching students that other referrals may miss. The Youth Truth survey, indicated with the blue arrow seen here, is an anonymous culture and climate survey.
Hello, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be back here today. I wanted to start off by saying that. We're talking today about our efforts to begin assessing student social emotional learning and wellness. It is abundantly clear that social emotional learning is connected to and a driver of academic learning. As we start diving into our initial results stemming from our efforts to measure students' social emotional wellness, it is important to say that we have a long way to go before SEL is universally up and running in every single classroom throughout our entire district. As it becomes increasingly more important to address the social emotional needs of our students and everyone in our community, Panorama was implemented to help us measure both the social emotional wellness of our students, how are they doing, and to measure our implementation of social emotional learning programs throughout the district. So now we'll go into some specific findings and the way we're administering the Panorama survey.
This timeline here is a visual to understand that the Youth Truth is a one-time and longer survey, and the Panorama is a shorter survey, which we do a pre and a post test for, or not a test, but a survey, where we will implement a pre and post survey, and that's in grades 4 through 12. This way we can see if the interventions that we're using all year are actually working in this year. This is the first time this year that we have this, and the survey is open right now, and we are encouraging our sites to have a strong finish because the survey closes on Thursday night. So the Youth Truth replaced what was called the California Healthy Kids Survey, which we had previously.
So here we start trying to answer the question of, so why do we do two different surveys that are pretty similar? And this slide actually, with a lot of information, we don't intend for anyone to have to read or absorb any of it, all of it now, but we can see that some of the topics align and fit together. This overlap allows us to have a higher degree of confidence in our results. And Panorama and Youth Truth, even though they seem like a duplication, work together to provide us different types of information about student, staff, and families. In general, Youth Truth provides information on the broad campus, climate, and culture, and the student and family experience. Panorama is more of a screening tool that allows us to assess the overall social emotional needs of students, and very importantly, allows us to drill down to individual students and guide what tiered interventions are needed. Panorama focuses student needs and focuses on student needs and social emotional strengths. And the Youth Truth captures their experiences of being in our system. There are similar information from different points of view. One asks, how is the system doing? And the other one asks, how are students doing within the system? There's some audio here.
One important detail of survey data is being sure that we have enough participants taking that survey. These response rates show that we are getting better at surveying students, but that we need to improve on getting families and to take this Youth Truth survey. Teachers are given time to take surveys within staff meetings, and classified staff should be offered this same time. We did learn from the Youth Truth partners at SCO that the family response rates, it's very common that those numbers are in the teens, and so we'll endeavor to increase those rates in 2024. The higher response rates help us have more confidence that we can believe the responses that we are getting. And it's really important that we consider these rates when determining the statistical validity to understand that a small percentile change might be less significant if we have a low response rate.
Oh, Jeremy, I think you need to mute yourself. Me. I just don't connect the audio.
Okay.
Turn the sound down on the device.
Feedback. Right, okay. So this next slide.
We say what a great example of feedback. And how
I'm sorry. Could you go back? I was getting out of feedback. I kind of missed what you said in this slide. Sorry.
No problem. In a nutshell, it's important that we have ample responses in the surveys. The more responses that we have, the more reliable that survey becomes. I can mention one thing. We added the actual numbers to this slide compared to the last board meeting. Before it was just percentages, but now this gives a better picture so you can really get a sense of things. We did learn from our Youth Truth partners at SCO that when you have family surveys in the teens, so like between 11 and 20, that's a very common number, but we do endeavor to improve those scores or responses next year. I think that's it. Next slide. So this is the main view that you see in the Panorama platform. And this is a common report that a lot of our principals are using at their school sites with families and their staff meetings. But you can see here, this top blue bar is supportive relationships. And that continues to be the most percent positive or most favorable topic. This is grades 4 through 12 in all of our schools. It was the same last year and it's the same this year. And the least favorable, or the bottom blue bar, is what's called self-efficacy, or kids thinking they could do it or staff feeling they can do it. And that is the same lowest topic, the same thing we had last year. And it's the same thing across the district, across all schools, which I find fascinating. We also notice that self-efficacy is the lowest percentile when compared to other schools nationally. And we can see, you'll see that red dot sort of at the bottom on the left. We wanted to point out one connection, which is pretty special this year. We have some district-wide work on math, and it's with Jo Bowler and her growth mindset idea. And so within the professional development, we are finding this connection. So we're hopeful to see, will our scores improve or increase, the feelings that students have that they report on the survey. You'll notice here that this is the teacher point of view, the teacher perception. And in the teacher survey, the highest percent favorable category is teaching efficacy. So it's their lowest area compared to other schools nationally. So where it's the blue bar, 67%, then on the right, you'll see that red dot. So that was interesting. And we wondered, does the teacher self-efficacy, does that impact the student self-efficacy, and vice versa? Thank you.
Here, and this is a new slide from our previous presentation, we have really had a lot of chance to dig into the results as a way to try to guide where we may try to focus interventions. So we can see here that Panorama gives us scores for 5 social emotional domains: challenging feelings, classroom effort, positive feelings, self-efficacy, and supportive relationships. You'll notice that the 6th and 7th grade students are scoring considerably higher than the 8th to 12th grade students. And you can see that there's a little bit of rebound in some of the well-being components for 12th graders, and maybe one area for 11th graders. But this snapshot clearly indicates that focusing on the middle and high school transitions and possibly increasing supports in middle school may be warranted. This finding is partially connected to, and the reason why we've really started focusing on holding handle with care meetings this year to improve the student support connections for students of concern during elementary to middle and middle to high school transitions. And I would like in the next few slides to show an example of the way we've been using Panorama to try to guide some of our interventions.
Can I go back to that previous slide?
It sounds like Omar might have a question.
Yeah, I just the curiosity here is from that 6th to kind of like 7th, 8th transition. Is there a way to like look at like how many or divided like students that are coming from within our district versus students that are coming from outside of the district, from the other feeder elementary districts? Is there any way that we could see that?
So yes, there would be a way to disaggregate that. It would be very complicated to do so.
And not all, you can share that not all of our feeders are participating in Panorama.
To my knowledge, I don't know of any that are. Yeah.
So, but because we don't know for sure.
Yeah, we don't know the status of the Panorama data from our feeder patterns. Shall we go on? All right.
I'm sorry, it's just we do have a stop point where we are going to allow for questions just from the Panorama.
I think it's 4 slides from now too.
Sorry.
I'd like to go into maybe a little bit of how we're using some of this information, because the reason why we really gravitated towards the Panorama type survey is because it allows us to actually create actionable interventions. So this screen here on the right side of the screen, we can see if a school counselor turns their program on and they click on students, they see a list of their students, but they also above that, and of course, I'm not going to show lists of students tonight, but they see above that the way the students are distributed, shown up with 4 different colors. And we can see that the students in red fall in the lowest category, the lowest. I'm not sure how they percentile that out, but it makes it possible for a counselor to easily click on those red areas. And by clicking on the red areas for supportive relationships and challenging feelings, we get 9 of 1,503 students who answered lowest in these 2 areas. And it's really impossible to make a phone call and bring in or send out a call slip to 1,500 students, but it is very possible to talk to 9 students. And that's exactly what we do. So once the intervention teams decide or create this listing, they'll talk to these 9 students and they will meet with them. And what we're finding is that when we do meet with them, it's true that some of them were like, oh, I wasn't taking it seriously. And then we talk to them and we still get to ask them, yeah, but how are you doing? Do you feel like there's people here that want to hang out, that want to be, they're here for you? Because I'm here for you. I'm your school counselor. I'm your school-based therapist. I'm whatever. And they get a sense of the resources that they have available to them. But way more important than that is the students who genuinely don't have anybody for them, who genuinely are feeling overwhelmed by challenging feelings on a regular basis. What we're finding is that when we sit down with them and we say, how are you doing? They're not doing very good. And we say, have you been thinking about hurting yourself? And they say yes. And we are able to provide interventions at that level. We're not just using it in those sort of granular ways, we're also using it system-wide. And so we can see that we have school site accountability plans where we are asking each school to put together a plan that demonstrates how they're going to use this data, to share this data with their staff, to plan a response based on the information at their particular site that utilizes social emotional learning lessons and helps us implement SEL on a much broader basis based on the results. Tier 2 teams analyze this data to identify students with no strengths. Again, that process I just outlined. And then our counselors also got thousands of free responses. And if a free response was indicative of a very, very impending emergency, we were able to actually flag those students. So, and follow up with them as well. So it's a great way for us to get student voice and see how students are doing, but way more importantly to me as an interventionist, it allows us to actually intervene on students and groups of students. Are there any questions?
Director De La Cruz, and then I saw Director De La Torre and Director Sheffield.
Thank you so much. This is such powerful information. I appreciated the question from Director Medina around disaggregation by like outside feeder schools versus our schools. You're also able to disaggregate by our sites. And is that something that we're looking at? Okay. Have we done that yet? Yeah, okay. Will we get to see the disaggregated by site data, or is that something that we're hanging on to?
Share, my mic isn't on, but we actually have that prepared. So we share a little bit about, yes, but we can share that information, future information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we really want to make sure that when we are starting to compare school by school, that we have a really good understanding of what we're looking at, because that can stack up in ways that we don't intend it to stack up. This is, one of the slides talks about how we're just starting with this information, and we're really trying to be cautious about making sure that the inferences that we're making from it are actually connect to something. When we look at schools, some of them stack up this way on one survey and then different on the other, and we don't really understand why that is. So would only share that information with a pretty significant caveat.
I just want to say that I really appreciate the level of care taken with data, because data can be manipulated and understood, and it, as much as we believe that data is objective, we also know that it really is not, right? And so I'm just super grateful for kind of that level of care, and take as much time as you need, because it's that kind of data ground truthing that will make this actually useful to us. So thank you for that. This question around the handle with care meetings, and these questions around kind of interventions. Who is intervening? Who has access to that information? And what does an intervention look and feel like?
The main groups in the sites that are looking at the data are what's called the tier 2 team. So that would contain, administrator, a counselor, a TOSA, the school-based therapist, and sometimes a school psychologist. Different sites have a tiny bit different makeup depending on availability and just how big that group gets. I know it's some, sometimes the groups, I think at one of Pioneer was pretty big that I got to join at one point, because they may have more counselors on special assignment. So I think that's that team approach. So it doesn't feel like one person is, having to hold all of that data, because really a person could sit in a room all day long and look at data. It would be a very long presentation. And really there's a lot of learning. We're still new with the application in some ways. This is only our second year with Panorama. So I did want to respond a little bit to your previous question. I know as a previous administrator, we want people to feel comfortable using and trusting the data. They're still learning the app. And so to feel like a school's being judged by that data when it's still new, I think that it is important to take careful measures in these beginning phases.
My last question is, and I appreciate the kind of the tier 2 makeup. I've also heard from teachers that having this information for them would be useful. And so I wonder at what point does the tier 2 interventionists kind of move into the academic side and make sure that teachers are at least aware of, because they're also seeing these kids every day, right? And so having some of that information would support academic support in some ways, as well as a sense of safety and understanding kind of the full picture.
I mean, teachers can see the scores for their students. They can't see the raw free responses, but they can sort by demographic group and they look at their different class periods. We had some offer of PD sessions during the January PD day and just some basic steps at the beginning of the school year to how to look at that data. So even we're slowly emerging and getting better every year. I know people are curious and they do want to know. And then there's some fear like, oh my gosh, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, how can I do this? But we're trying to support the idea that social emotional learning is the tier 1 for mental health. So the more we can realize even just positive feelings. I mean, the leadership class could do things with positive feelings. Even the restorative specialist could be a person to check in on students that don't have someone that's a supportive relationship. Even a campus supervisor, student advisor, just there could be a list of 20 kids like, hey, these guys didn't really think that they had a caring adult. Maybe just start to talk to them. And I'm really curious to see if this post data shows any change with the students who said they didn't have a caring adult, because it's not very many students at most of the sites don't have that many.
My last question is around the ways in which our data systems talk to each other. So is there a moment at which this will appear on Aries and then I'm also a little worried about that, because I don't want kids to necessarily get painted with a brush that comes from a data system that hasn't yet been fully vetted or more deeply understood. So I just want to understand kind of how our systems will at some point talk to each other once we have some sense of the quality of the data.
Yeah.
Have a mic right. It'll turn you guys off.
Yes, we have plans to integrate both academic data and data from SEL sources, mostly Panorama, in one platform. It's called EduClimber. We are about to roll it out with a selected pilot group of district level administrators with a gradual rollout in the next school year.
Thank you, Director De La Cruz. Director De La Torre, and then Director Sheffield, and I see Director Medina and Flores' hands up as well.
Okay, so I have two questions. Data is great and amazing, but it only works if it's collected across the board. So do we currently have a system in place where this data is being collected at all feeder schools and high schools, including feeder districts? Or is our plan to incorporate that? Because if we're going off of partial data, we're going to miss a lot of points.
Yeah, please.
That's a great question. Thank you. And thank you for the thoughtful questions from Director De La Cruz as well. We pay for the Panorama survey. And so we as a district are participating in Panorama. I believe there have been some lightweight conversations at the county level as we've identified this as a tool for us. But it is not something that other districts have selected to invest in and be a part of. So one of the things that we can do in our data points is start with our 7th graders. Obviously, we want to reach back and start looking at elementary for ourselves. It's something that we can continue to discuss with our neighbor districts, but we cannot require them to participate because it would be a cost to them to do that. I'm thinking of 2 data points that we can look at, 7th grade and 9th grade, to see comparison, right? Data points of students who've been in our system versus those who are coming to us from out of the district, and then students who've been with us since 7th grade and looking at their 9th grade data, just as 2 examples of how we can at least take advantage of every student who comes to us, even if they were a part of a feeder district to start.
The other part, go ahead. Just let it go.
Sample sizing earlier, you can't survey thousands, but you can survey 9. How are those 9 being identified? Did I misunderstand that? Okay. I just want a little more clarity on that because it seemed like if a sample size was being intervened with or questioned, I'd want to know more about where that sample size came from and how that was identified, because unfortunately, a lot of kids struggling with social emotional battles are going to be the first to say, no, thank you, I'm okay, and not have that discussion.
Yeah, that was our chief concern as well. So that was a sample size of 1,500 respondents that we were screening, we were filtering through to get 9 who responded in a certain way. And one of the reasons why this is taking so much time is as we build a data culture, everybody has to be very fluent in understanding the impact of a proper N, like the number of respondents and the proportion of the population that's responding. Every one of these findings that we're reporting tonight has been looked at against how many students are in the total population, how many of those students responded, and do we have a bias that's based on the number of people who responded? Because if 800 people take the survey, but there's 10,000 people in the group, your results aren't going to be very good.
Okay, so for Panorama, and I apologize, I might have missed this from just joining, is this something new that we're piloting? Is this something that is proven and we've seen results elsewhere? Or is this something where we're all coming up with new data points?
Yeah.
The Panorama survey was selected over about 6 meetings with the the SEL committee, Social Emotional Learning Committee. And this is our second. Yeah, it's our second year. Sorry, I think I'm
Pulling from data from nationwide. Both these have a very, very large number of students.
People online.
Yeah, sorry about that. Both of these surveys are normed against nationwide sampling of schools. The Youth Truth has a lot of schools in the county. Panorama has schools throughout the nation, and we can actually compare urban, suburban, and rural schools to ours and switch between those comparison groups when doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sheffield.
Thank you. I want to just kind of jump back to the handle with care meetings and data driving interventions and follow up where Director De La Cruz left off. Who initiates the interventions?
Yes,
Yeah, the tier 2 team, is sorting the data there together. And then it's 2 parts. A teacher can refer a student to the tier 2 team, say they're struggling with anything, academics, attendance, social, emotional. But also we can look at this data and find students when we sort different data points, like the students, the 9 or so that we found in a school that we're having low, supportive relationships. But, and I mean, so the data kind of brings kids to the top. So, the teacher can actually tag that group of 9 students and make a small group out of that and do, check-in questions with Panorama, which we're playing with, but we're not experts in that area yet.
But a teacher can.
A teacher could refer any student that they're concerned about at any time. Either
what
just
about
connect with a counselor or refer to the tier 2 team.
What about a parent?
A parent, normally they would start with their school counselor and say,
Yeah.
I'm worried about my student for whatever the category might be, and they could follow up with check-ins or really look at some data just with the parents.
And then will there be data collected on the demographics of who utilizes the Handle with Care meetings?
Well, I think when we use this idea of the Handle with Care meetings, it's really something schools have done for a long time. It's called an articulation meeting. So often the counselor from 8th grade will talk to the counselor from the 9th grade and make sure that they know which students have 504s, which students have IEPs, which students maybe might need a little, extra care, the Handle with Care idea. So
I guess my concern is that maybe somebody, and I know numbers speak, but also if people, if teachers or, it starts with a parent, maybe even having a conversation with the counselor, that it's uniform, that there's equity in this, that it's, and my follow-up would be that the resources that are offered then to that student, and are they made available to all students equitably?
I mean, I think the tier 2 team, part of that is to look at, okay, how many kids need this, how much of the resources available and how many students are needing it. We're finding that there's a higher need than we may have resources for. So that's when we look at that MTSS pyramid and we push some of those tier 2, supports. We push some of that learning information down to tier 1. Maybe we don't have enough small group counseling for a bunch of kids, but we could teach some of the students school-wide about some of those practices as far as like mindfulness or even strategies for getting along with other students as part of even restorative practices could teach some of those skills. So if they find that there's a need, even mental health, how to calm oneself. If the school-based therapists and the school counselors are in a tier 2 meeting thinking we don't have all the resources we might need for this, let's push this support down to tier 1. How can we teach all of our students about the use of an organizer? Maybe they're struggling with even like with tardies getting to school on time. It might be some messaging that's pushed out school wide or even some simple reteaching. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. Thank you.
Director Medina.
Thank you. First off, Superintendent Fernell, thanks for your response on the other districts and how we could use the 7th and 9th grade info. I think that's kind of what I was headed towards. But I do have a question around maybe assessing the levels of staffing needed to address all these needs. Like, is there some sort of way to measure, like, do we have sufficient staffing? And also, maybe measuring how much staffing we do need if we don't have enough, and kind of addressing something Director De La Torre mentioned about some students, might not respond, saying they need help, and are we still not ignoring maybe some that are on the top in the green, making sure that we're also checking in with them, and how are we doing that most effectively, ensuring that everybody gets checked in with effectively and it's equitable.
So one of the reasons why we're asking students, we're not asking students, do you need help? We're asking students questions like, do you believe that there is someone at the school who you can talk about your problems with? Is there someone in your life who will be there for you no matter what? These are the kinds of questions that we're asking, and the thing that's great about them with regards to the proportionality of support that we provide is when we look at who has relationships, a lot of times we look at who gets referred for help because we get referred for help within the context of a relationship. But if a student has got their head down and is the kind of kid who isn't reaching out to, isn't seen by people at school, they're less likely to feel like someone's there for them at school. And they're also less likely to ask for help and less likely to be referred. But if we ask them this question in the context of these surveys, they actually will look like they need help, and we'll get to ask them. And then we'll be like, oh, hey, this student has no one at school who they believe will help them. I'm going to be that person for them. And someone will just naturally be in that. And then hopefully when we ask them that question again next year or next fall, they'll say, yeah, actually there is someone here for me, because that's what we're looking for with these interventions.
And, following up on Dr. Sheffield, bringing up the issue of like parents being able to request interventions. Is there at any point any way of retrieving like parent data on how they feel like their children, like if they feel their children are doing well, if their children feel like they have someone there or anything like that?
The Youth Truth data does ask parents, and we have information from parents. We don't really have the ability to ask parents questions that is not completely anonymous. They're not connected in our SIS with regards to the panorama survey. So we wouldn't be able to track that back to their individual student, but we do have some sense of how connected parents are feeling. We have a sample size concern with the number of parents who are responding though. At 18% of the parent population responding to Youth Truth, what kind of inferences can we make with the results is an important question to ask.
Yeah, thank you.
Director Flores.
Thank you. A lot of my questions were asked already and answered. Thank you. Very thorough. And I just want to say also thank you. I mean, giving I think this is a Herculean task to ensure that all students or the students that need it receive the necessary assistance that they need. So I think I have a couple of questions. My first question is like, once they're identified, once students have been identified, right? So we have a very small niche of students, right? What sort of how we're keeping track that these students are being seen, right? What sort of support services they're seeing, and that sort of data. If you don't have that, it will be kind of nice to have it next time in terms of these kids were identified at these particular schools, and these are the services that they're receiving, for an SST, 504, whatever, right? So first of all, let me see if you are tracking that and to see if they're doing better, and if we're tracking how they're doing academically too.
Ideally, our tier 2 team would be documenting in ARIES either interventions or pre-referral interventions that, this is a student identified through the panorama survey. We have not yet formalized that practice, but I know the tier 2 team does document in the system any supports or interventions they're offering to the student. I know I've had, I meet with the elementary counselors, and that was a group that said, well, what if we see these 24 kids? And I said, well, when you look at that list of maybe students that are having challenging feelings, we found that they were looking at the list, like we already knew a lot of the kids. There are students that are already in our groups because we get the data back, and it's, we do the survey, the pre-survey in October for Panorama, and they have the scores by November. So by that point in time, they already are meeting with students. So it was reassuring to them that they knew most of the students, and there were some new students that were those we call internalizers that were sort of hiding. And so there was a way through Panorama to get to that. But I think that is the next step for sure, to find out, okay, how is that going? How are they, what's like sort of the end of the school year report out how that went? And Eric, I saw you. Did you guys have more? Okay, thank you.
I can't see it from here, Eric. You look like this tiny, so.
Director Flores, do you have more questions?
I do. Was Eric going to say something, or was he shaking his hand? I can't see them. They're very small from here. He was shaking his head? Okay. So my next question. So can you guys do me a favor and speak to the mic? Because I can't see you, especially the folks in the who are presenting. You're very, very far away. Oh, thank you. You can zoom in. Thanks. Hi there. My second question is, what can we do in terms of, or is there something that we are doing in the classroom per se? Do we have an SEL sort of curriculum a soft sort of landing where teachers can be, like the first step or some sort of intervention or some sort of systemic sort of SEL curriculum that we can implement, throughout the district.
Yes, in elementary school, we have what's called the toolbox tools, and the elementary counselors push into classrooms, and sometimes even through assemblies, they teach these 12 tools. And they're sort of strategies for students to, how to manage then when through life's little bumps. And then in 7th and 8th grade, currently we have Y-Try that some counselors are pushing into classrooms and doing those. One school even has found the use of Zoom just to be more streamlined to the classrooms. Through 7th through 12th grade, we have a product called Wayfinder, which we've had the last 2 years. And that's an activity, it's actually an activity library where a teacher can sort, okay, we want a 2-minute activity with mindfulness or a 3-minute activity with Energizer, maybe for the middle of a long block period. And those are strategies, and it's all part of ways that kids can help be more connected and know each other, increase that sense of belonging. Also through the Panorama survey, there's a piece there, it's called the playbook. And so teachers grades K through 12 can sort features in this playbook based on the findings from the survey. So that's neat. Within playbook, there's sort of an easy connector that it's the same vocabulary, so it's easy for them to sort. And then in grades 7 through 12, classroom teachers have access to that and can use it. Classroom teachers have access to the playbook within the Panorama app. The toolbox tools are taught more by the counselors, but all the staff knows about the toolbox tools and can refer the student, hey, what tool could you use right now? And so it's just increasing that vocabulary around the school. And over time, some sites really communicate with families, so the parents can also have access to the tools and know about that.
So a request that I have is that especially at that middle stage, 8th grade, 7th through 10th and 11th grade, is there a way to see if folks are actually using these tools that we have? And can we add that as a survey question? Are teachers using this? And if not, is there something that we can provide for teachers to make sure that, to ensure that they have the support that they need to do that sort of thing? Because I think it's important, but at the same time, I don't want teachers to feel overburdened by an extra activity to do, right? But it'll be kind of nice to track that information as well to see if our middle school and high school instructors are actually using the tools that we have implemented across the district. Thank you.
I can answer that if that's okay.
Yeah.
So also on something called the Staff Hub, it's the staff side of our district website. We have teacher created, it's called school-wide social emotional learning sort of plans for the year. So in elementary, it's like Mindfulness Monday, Toolbox Tuesday. I don't know what Wednesday is, I've spaced on that. Thankful Thursday, and then Fun Friday. And then in high school, we have sort of the similar version of that, where even it's Wayfinder Wednesday. So we're trying to implement the tools through those sort of a day of the week. There's even a song, a joke. There's some just kind of like keeping things fun and light in that middle school, high school way. And even for elementary school, there's little videos. So this teachers have created sort of a plan for the whole year. There's a slide for each month, something for each week. So different schools this year, they had to report out and part of accountability what their SEL or social emotional learning plan, school-wide plan for the year was. So we have a document where we can click the link and see what their plan was. So that usage of those school-wide or school-wide plans contains parts of Wayfinder. So because that Wayfinder is used in that plan, some teachers may not be going to the app and using Wayfinder as much as we might have thought they would, or as much as they could. So we do have usage reports that we can see, and we shared it with our district administrators. We do also try to model these practices in the principal meetings. Luckily, Ms. Turnell lets me get to do the sort of the intro or connection activity. So it's that idea of connection before content at the beginning of principals meetings. And we do that with the hope that the principals would then go with their staff meetings and try to model for their teachers, hey, this is a little energizer, this is a connection activity, or this is a mindfulness activity that we can do together. And sometimes we've learned some fun things about each other that we would not have known if we didn't do those activities. And then we're hoping that then the principal does that at a staff meeting, that it's such a great engaging activity that then the teachers will say, you know, that was easy, that was cool. I think my students would like this. Let me do this with my class. So that's what we're kind of hoping. But we also want to be sensitive that it's a coordinated approach at the site, because if you have to do the same mindfulness 6 periods a day, I don't think people would much like that. So we try to make sure that we're sensitive to that. And there's a plan and discussion through the site's leadership. It's something that really is personal for a school site. A lot of schools have what they call a soft opening. We have a few middle schools and a couple of high schools that instead of just day 1, chapter 1, page 1, it's really, let's connect with each other. Let's get to know the school rules, which is the positive behavioral interventions and supports approach, where we teach the expectations and then we take the kids around the school so they know how to behave in different areas of the school. If we don't teach our kids the rules, how are they going to follow those rules? So it's kind of a blending, and we can see where social emotional learning and this positive behavioral part, they kind of overlap. And it's also part of restorative practices where, you know, classes are getting to know one another and increasing that belonging and connectedness between students, but then also between the staff and the students. So they have a caring adult, but also that they feel like they're part of that class community.
So, so my last request would be, you know, it would be kind of nice to have the teacher usage reports, especially for Wayfinder, included in this report as a data point, because you know, we want to see if it's being used, and then, you know, what can we do next, right, if it's not being used. But thank you so much for your report.
Thank you. Director Delatorre, do you have a question? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Director Flores, for bringing the post-intervention topic up. So capturing data is great and important, but I think it's a very important point that we don't wait on post-intervention, trying to track and ensure these students are actually receiving the help that they need, and it's making a difference. Unfortunately, we've heard a lot from students through their listening sessions and other forums this year that they don't feel like they're being heard. They don't feel like they're being listened to. And if their only recourse is to continue to file an incident report, if they are brave enough to advocate for themselves, but they feel like those are falling on deaf ears and nothing's happening, we need to be better about identifying those situations and ensuring those students are being heard and are getting the help that they're asking for. And those are the brave ones that are speaking up and letting us know they need help. This data is helping us capture a lot of those students that are a little too afraid to use their voices. So it's great to identify those. But once we've identified them and offered that intervention, that follow-up process has to be a really big piece of this picture, or it's just not going to work.
It reminds me of the Safe School Ambassadors program, where we have sort of a student leader from the different groups around the school. We have that program in some schools this year. I think it's 5 or 6, but that's something we're looking at, are other schools interested in that, and how can we get grants to fund that? Another way that students who are more reluctant to report because they don't want to have any consequences is the anonymous reporting app called the Stop It app, which we may have heard around, and that's for the secondary schools, and that's in use. Is that true, Ms. Desideri, at all schools?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Director McNally.
So going back to this idea of how teachers are implementing SEL in their classrooms, I'm curious how teachers already are, or how they could also integrate SEL into their content matter. Whether that's a science class reading about the biology of stress, or an ELA class reading stories and having, SEL oriented discussions relating to them. So I guess I would be interested if we have any data on whether teachers are already doing that, how they're doing that, and if there's a way we could support more teachers in doing that.
Yeah, I think this is thank you for that question. As a mental health professional, I'm always wanting to integrate mental health competency standards, social emotional competency standards, not just in the mental health program, but in every single classroom. You can talk about social emotional wellness in every single one of our curricula. So influencing that practice and changing without making it feel like, because we don't want to come at teachers with yet another thing. And then for a lot of our teachers, that is yet another thing. We don't want to come across that way. And so we want to start measuring the social emotional wellness. And maybe once we start showing that teachers that are really focusing on and attending to and integrating these topics within their curriculum, that their students will actually, what we know about social emotional wellness is their students will actually outperform the others. And so that sort of wedge and spread where we get some people doing it, and then other teachers will be like, ooh, I want some of that. What are you doing that's different? And then it comes from within, and then it'll be motivated based on student performance. Because we can be very confident in our notion that if students feel emotionally looked after in a class, that those students will respond better to the curriculum of that class. So how to do that in as many classrooms as we have throughout this diverse district, that's the implementation science. And implementation science requires us to be able to measure certain aspects and yes, track certain aspects. And we're hoping to move closer and closer to being able to do that. This is the initial stages of that.
Great. Are there any other questions? Director De La Cruz.
So much of this conversation around supportive relationships, connectivity, being able to see kids and hear them and talk to them implicates language, right? And so for our English language learner kids, our monolingual kids who speak another language other than English, how are we able to disaggregate data for those kids who took the survey in other languages and understand their results as compared to somebody who speaks a dominant language in our school system? So I'd love to hear more about how that comes as you dig more into the data. I'd also love to know a little bit about, like, Devaney, we miss you at Proctor Terrace, right? The family engagement facilitator at schools who is bilingual is a critical linchpin to parent involvement, to students being seen and heard and understood. And so I'm just wondering, like, how did we support students and parents to find the Spanish language version of the survey or take it in class in the correct language? We have so many gaps in our system with kids who are Spanish language speaking, and that does not even count like all the kids who are other language speakers that we don't have those supports inside of our systems. So I just would love to hear a little bit more about how we understand this data and how we actually gathered this data with an eye towards kids and families who don't speak English.
We're just chatting that last year at the board presentation, we had a slide about, it showed English learners versus English only learners. And so it's interesting, it's definitely there, and we can sort all sorts of data, all sorts of ways, grades, whatnot. So by grade level. You mentioned the parent piece, and the parents would be taking the Youth Truth Survey. And I've thought different times, I wrote here in my notes, what about a survey party? Or how can we have a night or an event where it's like, kids can play, and it takes, I mean, the Youth Truth Survey takes 15 minutes, and even the Panorama Post Survey is less than 10 minutes. And, the attention time for any of us these days in 2023, it's hard to take 15 minutes to take that survey. I know as a parent, it was longer than I thought it should have been, but I know I want every last question answered as an employee to learn how the family experiences. So I think we do have to do improvement, and we really have to push that through the family engagement facilitators. So, working across our departments with the multilingual department, so they can, the family engagements. Oh, this is how they find it. This is where this is. Yeah.
I do want to add that the Panorama platform was chosen partially because how quickly and effectively it switches between languages, how they have normed for the Spanish group as well, and how it's not, of the surveys that we looked at, it's less language dependent. So when you take the Youth Truth survey, the questions are a little bit longer, and they not only do they require the language, but they also exist at a higher reading level. And so Panorama, when we chose it, was selected partially because it did that effectively. So your ability to understand even your own language was less likely. You know, the questions are simpler, is what I'm trying to say.
So in those school sites that don't have a family engagement facilitator, right, how are we kind of closing those gaps? Because they are alive and well in school sites that don't have that function.
All of our school sites have family engagement facilitators. There isn't a school without one. And I'm hoping to grow more.
Any other questions from the board? I have a few questions, if that's okay. So my understanding is that Panorama connects to the student who took the survey, correct? So we have demographic information around the student body that is participating in the survey. And tonight we're not seeing that disaggregated data, correct? We'll see that another time. Okay, thank you. Because I would really like to have a better understanding of who is responding and who is not, to the point that's been raised already. So that would be really interesting. Another question I have is, do we have choice over the questions or the data that Panorama is collecting? Yes, we do. We get to decide what those questions are.
We don't write them.
Yeah, you can select different themes and focus areas, and then we tried to match the staff version with the student version. So there were some themes that were in common, like the self-efficacy was important to us. Equity was a piece, I believe. The interesting part is you can add other questions, but really it's like you want the questions that are pre-packaged because they're norm reference, and you can really compare how is your school doing against all the other students and schools that are surveyed.
Understood. So there's comparison data across the board. That makes sense. And then I have another question. So I know we're talking a lot about, our students who are struggling and really centering those students. But are we also following up or looking deeper into students who do feel connected and supported to understand what some of our strengths are as either school communities or as a district as a whole?
So that is the benefit of a strengths-based survey, and we were pretty much hooked on or committed to using strengths-based because it does allow, and you can print out a little page for each student that a counselor could use, oh, these are your strengths, or this is the benefit of being a student who scores high in these areas. So that is one of the benefits of a strengths-based survey. The thing that is remarkable about it is that when we create the highest risk groupings and show them to a counseling department, they actually have a high level of awareness of those students. Maybe 1 or 2 or 3% of those students are kids that they don't come up to their attention. The thing that's really remarkable about this survey is actually remember those yellow bars? If you select for those students, now you get a student who is in the middle, who may be going down, and tracking those students that have middle scores over time may in the long run end up actually being more powerful than just looking at the students that frankly we already kind of understand. We see them, the kids that have their heads down are really easy to see, but the students they're looking like they're doing everything, but they're just right above the red. And this gives us the ability to create groupings of those, and then maybe do further surveys with them, push out other questionnaires. If we asked all those students, would you like a counselor to check in with you privately? Imagine that's where we're heading with this screening, is to get beyond just triaging the most critical needs, but maybe to start taking a step back and trying to prevent some of those critical needs from happening in the first place.
Thank you for that. I think what I also heard in the question is, how are we checking in with the students who feel like they have a strong connection in our schools, and ask them, what are we doing as a school or as a district that's contributing to how you feel? And I think that's an important reminder, like there are good things going on. There are things that we're doing well that students are feeling good about? And can we learn more about that so that we can continue to reinforce that?
Right. Or understand how clubs or outside of school, out of school time programs, I would really love to, have a visual of like, these are all of the things that our students are engaging with so that other students who might be looking for connections, they might be able to engage in some of those activities.
Your question made me think of sort of like the peer mediators or peer counselors. Those could be the superstars that like, hey, I've got so much to give. I want to, show what I've learned to other kids. Maybe they have an app that they use. Maybe it's some other way that they've learned something, maybe through counseling over time, that now they've sort of arrived in that area of well-being.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I
Good
think
question.
something that's important to recognize is that, there are a lot of different ways that students feel connected, and like therapy and counseling isn't the only way that students feel better about themselves and find connection and improve their social emotional learning. There are so many other different things that they engage in. And so having an understanding of that, I think it would be really powerful for them to see for themselves. And then I have one last question. We've also heard a lot, in our listening sessions and from students that they don't quite know how to access tools or resources that our district has available for them. So do we have any plans to help provide education or to, have some students be trained and be ambassadors in these tools? Or I'm just wondering, how we're going to raise awareness about what we're offering.
So this year we've had a series, and last year as well, we've had a series of mental health fairs to help reduce stigma, but also share the way students and what's available. We have several mental health clubs. There are peer counseling programs that are fledgling and in different sites. Those things are all happening. Some of the possible policy considerations that we're thinking about and have on here do point towards more youth involvement, more peer involvement, like youth who've been through challenging times, helping other youth who are going through challenging times. Like those types of mental health stigma reduction programs are very, very powerful. And hoping that we can get the word out more. Good mental health messaging, and I want to say it here tonight, involves three really straightforward kind of approaches. One is that it's super common for people to have mental health challenges. You are not alone. It is profoundly normal within our population to struggle. The second one is that you don't always have to be that way. And that when people look for and find help, the norm isn't that you have to suffer with your mental health challenge forever. The norm is that you get better. And that third message is you can and you will get better. And that there are people who can be there with you, living a full life. Mental health is not a terminal diagnosis.
Thank you.
Okay, let's continue.
We're going to transition to you.
Are we on slide 23, 24? So now it's time for Youth Truth. The results for the January 2023 are actually transparently posted on our website. So if you were just to search Youth Truth 2023, you would find a link to that, or you can go under the departments and then Ed Services page, and it's found on the bottom left. So we do know we need to improve our fluency with the platform with more users, with training practice, and we want to increase the data utilization. So school sites are becoming more fluent in the data as they prepare their SIPSAs. As we work on our LCAP, we often lean on the Youth Truth data and specific questions to help us there are metrics to see if what we're doing is working. And we also want to improve our response rate so we can rely on that data more reliably. Thank you.
There's a tremendous amount of information on this page. And so I kind of want to just start off by orienting us to what we're looking at here. So this is opinions, student and staff perceptions of safety at school, represented as a percentile normed against a national comparison group. So we can see, so that the maximum on any of these questions would be 100. And this shows where we fall represented as a percentile within each one. And so we can pretty quickly see that just overall, what we see is that our numbers are alarmingly low, which tells us that a lot of folks in our system, increasingly, as they get older, are feeling unsafe within their school sites, both elementary, middle, and high school students. And we can see students are, are in around the 50th percentile and 40th percentile. Last year, that number has gone down to the 21st percentile in elementary. We can see that students in middle school, the 21st and 16th percentile last year against this year. And then high school, 25 to 15th percentile. So these are numbers that they just represent the number they represent. And these can be baselines that we can benchmark against for improvement. I mean, this definitely is something we want to improve and figure out strategic ways to improve this. Staff perceptions follow a similar pattern where elementary school staff feel safer than their middle and high school counterparts. Middle school staff, 20th and 15th percentile, and then high school is one of the places where we did not see a decrease between last year and this year. So that is where we're at. Did I miss anything on that slide? All right.
The norming against the lowest, typical, and highest.
Oh yeah, on the side there, we just wrote the lowest. We just kind of tried to express the idea of a percentile in a different way. And so the sort of average national school or the typical national school would be at the 50th percentile. And so we're going to switch from safety now to the perception of discipline being fair.
So, yeah. So when we're taking a look at this slide, it's the similar. So Eric did a wonderful job of helping you understand the difference between the lighter colored bars and the darker colored bars. So you're able to see the kind of trend over time, how students are feeling their perception of discipline last year to this year, and how those compare across what a national stage might take a look like. One of the things that's interesting about Youth Truth is that it really is a format in which the students are asked questions that are very similar to what the teachers are asked. And so you're able to get a sense of how does it feel to be on our campus, whether you're looking at it through the eyes of the child or looking at it through the eyes of the staff. And there are those kind of parallel questions that the parents are asked as well. So one of the things that's very interesting about Youth Truth is that you are able to get the perception of what it feels like to be on campus from all of our stakeholder entities here. There was one slight adjustment when we were asking the elementary school students, because trying to keep it age appropriate, they're asked slightly different questions. And so when we look at discipline is fair, the staff was asked, do you believe discipline on your campus is fair? The high school students were asked that. The middle school students were asked that. The elementary school students were not asked, do you think discipline is fair? But they were asked the question, do students behave in class? And so we offered that as kind of an alternative question in this same format. And again, you are able to see that in the eyes of the students, regardless of the age band, the students are acknowledging that they feel that there has been a little bit of a decline in their perception of fairness. Again, we do have to take, keep in account, I am not a statistician. And when you are talking about slight changes, there may be some, statistical derivation, and I'm sure other people that have a stronger statistical background can talk to you about that. But when you see these big jumps, as is evident in the elementary school students, we are seeing that the way that they feel being on campus this year is pretty objectively different than the way they were feeling last year. And that's something that we are acknowledging and taking a look at. And that's kind of giving you a sense of the type of data you can pull from Youth Truth. Similar to Panorama, we could probably spend weeks digging into the level of mining that you're able to do, disaggregating, while Youth Truth will not allow us to get down to an individual human. How do you feel in this moment? We're able through Youth Truth to not only look at a question across stakeholder groups, but we're able to then compare ourselves. And in this slide, we've chosen a typical school that is participating here. We could change that consideration to let's compare ourselves only to schools in Sonoma County. Let's compare ourselves only to schools within Santa Rosa. Let's compare ourselves to other suburban school districts. Let's compare ourselves to other schools that serve predominantly socioeconomically disadvantaged students. And you're able to do that live with just a click. So you can, while sitting in a tier 2 team or at a data mining conversation, somebody might ask a question and you can make that adjustment instantly.
I do want to acknowledge that those previous 2 slides used to be about 12 slides each, because you have to go to the elementary, middle, and high school report, and then you have to go student, staff, and family reports. It's really quite a bit of collaboration across the districts. I really want to call out the IT department that really was helping us do that. So
Can I just point something out? And maybe we can find a quick data point as we continue. The total number of respondents. I think we had that data and maybe took one of those slides away. So if we might be able to share that with the board, that would be helpful.
Slide 14 has some numbers that you could see with Youth Truth, but I can find a number. Youth Truth reports out on the total number, like of families, staff, and students smashed together. So it looks like, 10,000 students responded, 10,442, 864 staff members, and then 2,647 families. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Where is that?
Slide 14. So
we don't have numbers.
Oh, this one.
but below the percents are the numbers are.
At the beginning.
Yeah.
Can you go back? Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Again, we feel good representing numbers based on. Again, we feel good representing results from numbers that have, this high of an N with this proportionality to the total number in the group.
So slide 27, please. You'll see slide 27. This is actually a snapshot or a screenshot of middle school data. So one unique feature about the Youth Truth, even though it's anonymous, is that the students in middle and high school, they get to report out on their own demographics. So because of that, students get to self-identify on groups like LGBTQ+, and there's a chance here for us to see how do we compare students who are identified as part of the LGBTQ+ group and not. And we can see that the students that were part of the LGBTQ community here, want to make sure I get this right, scored lower on all areas measured by Youth Truth except relationships. So that's at the bottom section. Obviously, we want to close these gaps and set goals to improve relationships for both groups, but it's good to see the similarities. And there's a similar pattern to this in the high schools. So if you want to just look closely at the top part, just look at the dark bars and how short they are. And if you look at the bottom chart, look at how much longer those dark bars are. You'll look at the white arrows that point to belonging and peer collaboration. And there you can see that middle school, there's a big difference, especially in the belonging and peer collaboration. So it was in the 4th percentile for students that are part of the LGBTQ group, and that's on the top. And look at that bottom white arrow and look at how much bigger. That's the 39th. Yep, the 39th percentile for students that are not identifying as part of that community. One thing we noticed, and we put the yellow equal signs here, is in the category of relationships, and this is just for the middle school group, but it was interesting that they're the same percentile. And so whether the students are part of that, of the LGBTQ group or not, they felt like the relationships with their staff members was the same. So it's just an interesting, little chunk that we noticed there. And I think that's all.
So we pointed that sort of granular finding out that we think is interesting and definitely points to a need for additional intervention. We want to try to make it so that all of our subgroups of students, no matter how we're getting the information about them, respond and should respond similarly. And this may be to Director McNally's question about getting staff to engage in these things and integrate these topics into their curriculum. Our own students are telling us that the biggest middle and high school students are telling us that the biggest barrier to their learning is feeling depressed, stressed, and anxious. So when we ask our students and use student voice to say, how can we teach you better? What's keeping you from succeeding in school? These are the things. And so that is not just something that the mental health and wellness team can address. If our students overwhelmingly are telling us that these things are the biggest barrier to the learning, really it stands to reason that all of us should be engaged in helping them feel less depressed, less stressed, and less anxious. And we have more time for questions.
Questions from the board? I see Director Flores's hand up, Director Medina, and Director McNally.
Once again, thank you. The Youth Truth Survey is pretty extensive, right? So there's lots of questions and there's lots of stuff you can, put in here. And I just want to say thank you for not putting everything, because we would spend days, delving into every single question. So having said that, what are we doing per site? Because I know different schools receive different data, right? And different data points and points of strength and points to work on. So my question is, what are we doing as a district to make sure we are schools are addressing those unique shortfalls, right? And celebrating, what they're doing well.
One thing we're putting out more of this year is more the idea of accountability. So they have to report, the schools have had to share, the principals reported on when are they going to review their youth truth data? When are they going to review their panorama data with their staff? Sometimes it's just a date for their staff meeting, but I've heard reports back from principals saying, hey, we looked at our youth truth data, or a tier 2 member at one of our monthly meetings for the site leaders would say, hey, we were looking at our panorama data, or hey, we had a question on our youth truth, and people will email me and try to find out more. But they really are using that data for their SIPSAs, their single plan for student achievement. And we use it for the LCAP at like in ed services. And we're planning the LCAP. We're really digging in to try to find clues or metrics to be used that are, related to the action in the LCAP or the SIPSA.
Some questions address specific staffing, like principals and all that. And sometimes folks take it personally, right? So as a board member, I would love to see, systematically, what are we doing throughout the District of Santa Rosa in terms of making sure we address these issues that are popping up here, right? In a systematic way, so that way no one feels like they're being targeted, because some of these questions, I have friends who are in education and they felt, down because of the way the survey came down, right, or came out. So I think it will be important for us to implement something that is, district-wide in terms of what are we doing to support our teachers, our principals, to address the unique issues that are happening per site, without the evaluative or the having a sort of bad consequence, because I mean that is one of the issues that I think I'm hearing from the educational community that, some of the scores were pretty low in some schools. And they're taking them personally. So I think it will behoove us to make sure that we do something systematically and systemically to ensure that we are addressing the issues throughout the district. I don't know, was there a question somewhere in there?
There we go. Okay, so you are absolutely right. And that is one of the important features of a healthy, data-driven community. Because one of the things that often happens, and Youth Truth actually has this whole preparation, is they call it the 4 Ds of data mining. Because what typically happens at the beginning of data mining is you look at the data and you are struck by one of 4 things: despair, dejection, denial, or debating. So I look at the data and I think, oh, there's nothing I can do, or I'm going to argue with the data, or I'm going to pretend that the data didn't happen, or I'm just going to feel overwhelmed in this moment. And so one of the most important things to happen is, before you unpack the data, to actually work with your community about why data. When we ask our students every day in our classrooms to take risks, to be open to our critical feedback for them as learners, we are asking them to trust that this grade is not an evaluation of them as a human. It's an evaluation of how they performed in this moment. And that's the exact same relationship that we as educators, we as schools, and we as a district have to embrace this data. This data can be scary and overwhelming. But one of the things that I've always enjoyed about Youth Truth is it doesn't give you a grade to slap on your forehead. It tells you, how have you grown since last year? How have you changed? Where are the things that have been adjusted? And unlike California Healthy Kids, which was a wonderful survey, that you only got results every other year, you couldn't actually feel that live data. And so with Youth Truth, being able to get the results of that information while the children are still within your reach, while they are still in your class and in your classroom, and being able to couple it with Panorama, where you see not only at the beginning of the year, but at the end, you're able to say, ooh, this data stung, let me try something, and then get immediate feedback on whether or not it's working. As educators, we talk about that formative data. Most surveys, climate surveys, are just the autopsy. It's added you do, but you can't act on. That's why the partnering of this live data, getting that feedback so quickly, you can try something and see immediate impact. So that's one of the questions that comes up is, why both? Because both actually feeds, is what you're doing working? And if not, gives you time to try something else.
Thank you. I'll let the other board
Dr.
member.
Medina?
Thank you. Again, thank you for the presentation. I simply had a question around the data, like the questions. I feel safe at school and discipline is fair. The data shown to us, it's a percentile of, I think it was nationally. Can we also get it, like the results specifically for like just our district? And I request that we get that just to look at maybe how we've changed within our district and not necessarily compared to nationally, because I know that there's a lot of other variables there. I do like seeing this, but I'd also like to see just specific what happened within our district in terms of the responses without all that external data being part of it.
Yes. We can ask specific questions. We can frame questions within the context of whatever community we would like. So we can compare ourselves to ourselves. We compare ourselves to last year. we can compare ourselves to the county and so on.
Well, I recognize that we have that ability,
Yes,
but I would like to receive that data. That's what I'm saying.
thank you.
Director McNally.
My question is also a data question, just to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So let's say on the slide about the LGBTQ plus students, those are percentiles amongst Sonoma County schools. Is that correct? So then say we're fourth percentile in something, does that mean that 96% of Sonoma County schools scored higher than us in that area?
Well, yes, and you've got
Microphone.
the fat bar compares how we scored within all of the information that was collected by Youth Truth. That skinny teeny bar below is the line of Sonoma County schools. And as you look at that skinny teeny line that says Sonoma County schools, the hatch mark on the far left was the lowest of the Sonoma County schools. The hatch bar on the far right was the highest of the Sonoma County schools. And the, I think it's the mode, the median is the notch in the middle. So when we look at, because I'm going to just use engagement, we see that our score, the raw score, was 3.06 on a Likert scale of 1 to 5. The lowest score, we were at 3.06, which was in the 4th percentile. We were not nationally. When it compares to other Santa Rosa schools, we're slightly above, but we're below the median. And so you can compare us with the fat line, which is nationally, and the skinny line below, which was chosen in this image to be the Sonoma County schools.
Okay, so the percentiles are national. Then my other question is, so then if we look at the discipline is fair slide where we're comparing percentiles from one year to percentiles from the next, wouldn't that then, if they're percentiles, wouldn't that not necessarily mean that our score changed? It could mean that other schools did better.
Yes, that is a good question. And the question is, it depends, because it's kind of difficult to know why this is changing. So if you go back to slide 14, where we showed the sample, it could be a change in who responded to the survey. So there is a little bit of difference in response base, so the percentile will be based on who responded. And I think we were, for example, for students, we're about 80%. And for staff, we're about like 2/3, 65%. So depending on who answered, or who was the 60% that answered last year versus this year, that could lead to a change in the scores underneath. And as you were saying, since the metric here is our ranking nationally among all the schools, all the youth through schools, it's possible that other schools are doing better, right? Which if we stand still, right, everybody passes us, right? So that would lead us to lowering our percentile. So it's kind of difficult to know because Youth Truth is an anonymous survey, so we cannot link the responses back to the students. That has strengths, but at the same time, it's kind of difficult to know year-to-year changes and what we like pinpoint and say this is why. Go ahead. Microphone. Sorry. Oh.
So we had 18 slides that represented this data. And when we combine them to one, we did lose a little bit of the fidelity to the actual measurement. but the representations, the relative differences across years did not change.
Yeah.
Then that's what I just want to double check that when we
Yeah.
did that, we chose to go with percentile because it made it possible to put it on one page. Because we were trying to figure out how to draw lines of, it just got really crazy, and it was 18 pages. This is the part we wanted to get to, the question and answer, not clicking and then having everyone's eyes glaze over. So we did, in fact, students across the years did change in very, very similar ways, because the normative groups that the percentiles are based on are really, really big, and they don't change that much. So does that make sense? So the statistics changed a little bit, but the actual representations and the trends that we're showing probably didn't change within the actual error rate of this type of data.
Yeah.
I'd love to add that on slide 24. We actually linked in our district website where you can find the youth truth data. And one of the pieces on the top of that section on that Ed Services page, it talks about the provides a video on navigating reports on their website. So it's called the youthtruthsurvey.org backpack. So that's if you really are someone that wants to learn more about how to, dive around in that data, we would love to have partners. Thank you.
Just kind of as a follow-up to that, when we are analyzing this data, are we looking at statistical significance? Like, do we have the understanding of how to do that? Or is that kind of going back to what you're saying, case of like, maybe this is an area where we would like some support?
Just response rates. I mean, I'm not a statistician either. I used to be a Spanish teacher. So
Sorry,
growth edge right there.
I can provide you statistical significant results if you want. It's it's kind of difficult with like summary data, but I can work something out and I should be able to give to you, like whether or not the decline is significant year to year.
Thank you. Director De La Cruz.
I am loving the Youth Truth pages on the website. They're so cool, and they're, like you said, overwhelming, right? I have a couple of questions around the design of the survey, because I noticed there are some specific Sonoma County questions, like specifically around wildfires. And I'm wondering like how much discretion we have to design survey questions, given that this is a national survey. So I know we have like, certain questions that are national. I'm guessing we have certain questions that are county specific that we have the ability to work on with SCO. Is that, so just, yeah, I would love to just kind of hear a summary of like what the process is to design survey questions. And then I think my second question, which is around kind of survey design, is as we think about, being an asset framed or a strength-based survey, wanting to make sure that we understand what strengths we do have in the face of such overwhelming results. Is there a place where we are asking kids what's working, right? Because, it's like a key tenet in equity work that the folks who are closest to the problems are also closest to the solutions. They just don't have the positional authority, the resources to actually make those solutions happen. And so I'm just wondering, like, how are we surveying the good stuff and getting some of the district specific or even site specific information in a survey like this?
Okay, there we go. So when we look at Youth Truth specifically, because we are in a Sonoma County collaborative, when we look at Youth Truth, we are working with the Sonoma County team to identify what questions in Youth Truth. They have modules, and we participate in a subset of those modules. In addition to these, there are questions that go much deeper into drug and alcohol. There was the Sonoma County specific about response to some of the crisis that our community has experienced that's unique to us. But because we are participating in this Sonoma County Office of Education Collaborative, we aren't doing very much in terms of youth group at customizing those modules, simply because the more we customize, the less fidelity we will be able to get when looking within the context of our community. Where Panorama has the universal screener, and then as we build some dynamic groups that we want to track, we can customize weekly or monthly or quarterly check-ins and be able to be very strategic. But even within those two frameworks, we would like to be able to stay with normed questions, because sometimes when we ask, like, I have a really great question I'd like to ask, because I am not a fully trained person who can write an accurate question, my own inherent biases will filter in and give us potential for skewed data. I won't say flawed, but skewed. And so one of the things that's been very exciting this year is partnering both these county and these national normed surveys with the work that our principals are doing on what we've been referring to as their problems of practice, and bringing, whether we're looking at Rooster, the wedge and spread, or street data, looking at asking some of those very local, what has been your experience, what's working, what's not, and partnering those intimate site-based questions and local questions with these county and nationally normed tools, so that we can get a pretty accurate picture of some of the things that are working and some areas that need attention.
The theme that we're walking away with already is how we can emphasize strengths in terms of what's working. So we can absolutely, with our collaborative, take that back as feedback and see how we can do that potentially across the county.
Any other board member questions? Thank you.
Right, we are going to shift gears a little bit now, and we are going to go into talking about discipline. This presentation has 3 parts, and we are going to stop at the end of each part for questions. We are going to review first state guidance around discipline and kind of like this overall statewide context in which we are working. And then we are going to focus on 2 questions. Who is suspended and what are students suspended for?
So sometimes one of the things that comes up with this question of discipline is, because discipline is often guided not only by classroom or school policy, but board policy, administrative regs, and the California Education Code, there is this kind of mistaken idea that discipline is absolutely 100% rigid. The rules are the rules are the rules. And the reality is that's just simply not the case. One of the things that we often are reminded of is that discipline, while guided by California Ed Code, is a constantly shifting set of rules and policies. And this little memo that you see right here from 2021 is one example of the adjustments that are constantly happening when we take a look at discipline. So we may see shifts not only in our own practices, but we see shifts that come down from the state of California or from federal guidelines, looking at some of the trends in how we respond to data. This list right here, while in no way inclusive, gives a list of some of the adjustments that we've seen, not just locally, but across California and nationally. Things like moving away from disciplinary measures as a means of looking at attendance response, looking at restorative practices, or this whole phrase of, instead of suspension, we support or we intervene. looking at social emotional learning, as we've been talking here tonight, restorative practices, looking at those positive behavior interventions and supports, that PBIS model, and really kind of looking at that concept of suspension as a last resort. One of the things that does come out frequently is this understanding of where do suspensions come from? Because that's one of the kind of more objective metrics that we take a look at. And in schools, when we think about the word suspension, it really falls into one of three categories. You've got a class suspension where a child attends school all day, but may not attend one particular class. Then you've got what's known as the in-school suspension, where again, the student attends all day, but they don't attend any of their classes. They are in a sometimes sequestered or isolated area being supervised. And then you've got that third and highest level, which is the out of school suspension. And for our purposes today, the data we're bringing to you is going to focus on the in-school suspension and the out-of-school suspension, because we just want to be able to kind of focus our lens for tonight. There is, of course, some policy around when a child can or should be suspended, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So what you have here, again, not inclusive in any way, is a list of a variety of the different reasons that a child may be suspended. And it's important to know that as state law changes, there are certain policies that are either in there and really focused, or they may have sunset and they're no longer important. For example, I always laugh, there is an actual ed code that's, I believe it's 48900S, and it refers to possession of a particular drug called soma. It is almost never ever seen, but at one point it was so important it got its own ed code. Other ed code violations are really on the way out, and that's why we've italicized there 48900K. 48900K, for those of us who have been in education for a while, know that this is the one that is incredibly problematic, because it's the one that refers to defiance and disturbance in a classroom. A concept that is so subjectively used is that it was found to be one of the primary causes or correlations to disproportionate disproportionate suspensions within schools. And so over the years, you have seen actual address of this particular ed code. Right now, while 48900K is still on the books, it is not permitted to suspend a child from K to 6 for a K violation. So if a child is behaving in a way that is disruptive or defiant, a school is not allowed to respond with a suspension for that purpose. Now, in 2019, we got another letter that said we're expanding that prohibition all the way through grade 8. So a child may find that they have a K somewhere in their behavior, but it can't be the primary reason or the only reason for a child facing a suspension. We believe, if you were going to ask me and, pin me down and say, what's your bet? I do anticipate that over the next few years, we are going to see that prohibition expand all the way through 12th grade. But at this point, it is still an option at the grades 9 through 12. Now, you also notice that there are some ed codes on this list that are bold-faced. One of the things that our policies and our policymakers have been really stressing is this idea of suspension as a last resort. So when we see these kinds of violations, suspension should never be our first go-to, with the exception of A through E. So if a child gets into a fight that either causes physical injury or attempts to cause physical injury, that might carry a suspension for a first offense. But if their violation is smoking nicotine or writing on a bathroom wall, Our laws indicate that our first response should not be through suspension. Must not. Yeah, we must try something else ahead of time. Yeah. Yes. Perfect timing.
You mentioned disproportionality. Is that racial disproportionality, gender disproportionality, both?
Yes, all of it, yes, we, and I don't mean we Santa Rosa City Schools. I mean, we as the greater community do see disproportionality. We see it along racial lines. We see it along discipline or gender. We see it along LGBTQ. We see it along age lines. And we actually do have some slides that are going to show that to you tonight.
And then on the defines on the K, I understand that the kind of policy change was that it can't be the primary reason for suspension. It can be a secondary reason for the suspension. And then I wonder, do we have data on the extent to which K is used in a 9 through 12 context for suspensions? Okay, then we're going there. All right, you guys.
Oh, so
No, I'm.
Yeah. That microphone is being problematic. Yes, that is something that we are taking a look at. It is something that we monitor pretty actively where we will look across, discipline. We've had conversations about, we're noticing that that one is a K. What's going on with that one? What are some of the things that you've tried? And what are the other interventions that you're mapping?
Director Delatorre.
I noticed you mentioned in the non-highlighted infractions that suspension would not be the first response for those offenses. Is it are we treating it as a case-by-case basis? Are we treating it as a site basis as far as how many responses until we get to a suspension? Because even though it shouldn't be a first response as we work through, students do need structure and boundaries. And what the community is echoing is that they're in fear that too many of these offenses are continuing without proper discipline. And that's really up to us to try and find that line and figure out what's going to be best to keep the student in class, help them find that balance and get education, but not put other students at risk. So are we?
Absolutely. And one of the most difficult realities when we look at discipline, and I frequently say I live in the gray, because there is very difficult, a lot of people say, can we just have an if-then statement that if you do this, then the response will always be. But the most effective discipline is the one that targets the cause or the root, not the behavior itself. And so whether we're talking about aggression, or we're talking about truancy, or we're talking about graffiti, behavior represents a need that child is experiencing. And finding what that need is and responding with discipline that tries to address that need is our most effective. Suspension is one model, and it is based on the exclusion model. It is saying that for this time, you need to not be here. We know that exclusion will eliminate the immediate incident. It doesn't change the behavior, and that's our ultimate goal, is helping this child reintegrate. So one of the things that we are as a community looking at is not only how do we respond in that moment, but what are the structures we need to do to bring that person back into our community in a healthy way.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Those are great points, and I'm glad that's the vision we're looking at this at. It's just as important to look at it from the other side, especially with hazing and bullying, to make sure that we're not providing too many chances, and the student being hazed and bullied feels like they're not being listened to, and they're not being protected. So it's a real balance we're trying to find, and you guys are doing the work and digging in and trying to find that balance. But it's real important that we keep both sides' perspective at play.
Agreed.
Director Medina.
Thank you. First off, I'm glad to see this great move away from zero tolerance. But in listening to a lot of students and such, of the ineffectiveness of suspensions lately, and this might not be for this moment, but I would like to know, in terms of like within the law, what are other options we have in terms of forms of suspension, whether it be like community service, Saturday school, maybe at some point have that conversation and discussion of like within the law, and also the conversation within the context of equity and what it all means. So if we can get to that at some point, that'd be great, because I hear a lot from students right now that they feel that when students are being suspended, they're feeling like it's a vacation and they're not really experiencing the discipline portion of it.
Thank you.
Director Flores.
Thank you. I don't know if you can do this briefly. Could you explain how these incidents are elevated to an expellable offense? Because they sometimes are. Could just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, I'll give you the very short version, because we could, spend an entire night on that. There are.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there are really three categories of when a behavior may raise from needing a suspension to the consideration and recommendation of expulsion. And it is critical because everyone in the room understands this, but it is important to understand that the only entity who has the power to decide to expel a student is yourselves as the Board of Education. A school can only make a recommendation. A school has no power to expel a student, and that is important, and that is the protection of the right of the student to be able to have full due process. A student may face an expulsion for one of three categories, and I'm going to start with the most significant and then work my way down. Those are the mandatory recommendations for expulsion, and there's only 5 of them. And they are possession of a gun on campus. And the definition of a gun is clearly outlined in California Ed Code. It is not possession of the knife, but it is the actual brandishment in a threatening way to cause harm. That's number 2. Number 3 is sales of drugs on campus, not just possession of the drugs, but actually selling them. Number 4 is a sexual assault. And number 5 is possession of an explosive. If one of those items happens on the campus, the principal must write a recommendation for that expulsion and bring that to you for consideration. That's the mandatories. The second and the third form of recommending for expulsion fall under those that are called the shalls and the mays. So the shall is a situation in which the principal shall write a recommendation. You may or you may not, if it's proven, make that recommendation for expulsion. But what's really important to know, both in the shalls and in the mays, is that it's not enough to prove that a child did the act. They must also prove a secondary finding. So it may be that a child got into a very serious fight that resulted in serious injury. That by itself is not enough. You must also prove that either all means of correction have been attempted and have failed, or that other means of correction are not feasible in that situation. Or you have to be able to prove that that child returning onto campus poses an ongoing physical danger to others. So you hear, even through these discretionary recommendations for expulsion, this reiteration on the fact that we have to try other things first. And so it is important to know that when a child is being brought to you for consideration of such a serious exclusion, is that the school does never make that determination easily or lightly, and it must be coupled with other means of correction that have been attempted. I know that that's not enough. I can go much deeper, but I think for the purposes of our conversation, that gives you the framework.
Yeah, no, because we spent that whole, board meeting on it a while back, but I just want to make sure that that was in here. Thank you.
Yes.
Are there other board member questions? Thank you.
All right, I'll continue. Now we are going to jump into the data, and we are going to start to who is suspended. Before we start, all this data come from this school year, so we are just going to focus on 2022, 2023. Roughly 7% of all our students were suspended at least once this school year. So here you can see that that means that roughly 14,700 students were never suspended. That doesn't mean they didn't participate or receive any other sort of discipline, but they were never suspended. The rest of the students, 77% were suspended at least once. Now, focusing on this group of students, we know that 64% of them were suspended only once. So the rest of the 1/3 of them were suspended more than once over the school year. And here you can see that then the second most common category was 2 suspensions this year. The third most common was 3 suspensions, and so on. So, and then from there is a decline. And we do see a student that was suspended up to 10 times this school year. Now, remember, these include both out of school and in-school suspensions. Now, when we disaggregate this data by school level, and we compare our elementary, middle, high, and charter schools, here I plotted in blue the total enrollment in these 4 groups of schools. And in red, I have the number of suspensions that we observe for this school year. So 3 findings really stand out to me when I read this graph. So focusing on the high school bar, you can see that the red bar is the highest across all our levels. We observe 643 suspensions there. Now, that might not be surprising because also we have the most students in high school. As you can see here, we have roughly 8,000. So that pattern might be just due because of the number of students that we have. For that reason, on the left, I provided also the percentages of, and that is the percent of students enrolled in each one of those levels that were suspended at least once. So once we disaggregated it that way, we actually see that middle school students are actually more likely to be suspended than any of our students. And that roughly is 13% of all our middle school students were suspended at least once this year, versus, for example, 8% of our high schoolers and 2% of our elementary schools. This also highlights that suspensions as a form of exclusionary discipline is really not used that often in elementary schools, which is, I think, the pattern across the nation. Now, sometimes looking at percentages might be a little bit difficult, so I show this another way. So how many or out in how many students do we observe a suspension? So if you remember, middle school was 13%. Another way to represent the number is 1 in 8. So 1 in 8 of our middle schoolers were suspended at least once or will experience a suspension this school year. That increases to 1 in 12 of our high schoolers, 1 in 24 for our charter school students, and 1 in 43 in our elementary school students. I also disaggregate the data by race, and I present to you both that one in a denominator, and then at the bottom there you see the overall raw numbers. So this data then shows kind of like works towards the disproportionality if we see that the students are suspended more or less often when we compare across our racial groups. So for example, if you look at reading the chart from right to left, sorry, left to right, we see that 1 in 8 of our American Indian or Alaska Native students were suspended, 1 in 26 when we consider Asian American and Pacific Islanders, 1 in 11 of our Black or African American students, 1 in 12 for our Hispanic or Latino students, 1 in 16 for students identified as multi-ethnic, and 1 in 19 for our white students. Again, here I want to point out that the raw sizes are pretty small for some of our groups, given our enrollment patterns. So there you can see that our Hispanic or Latino students make up the majority of our enrollment. And then you can see that our American Indian or Alaska Native make the smallest group. And I know I went pretty quickly, but are there any questions about this set of slides?
I see Director Flores' hand up, then Director Medina, and then Director De La Torre, Director De La Cruz.
I'll just ask one question because I'm sure the other board members have lots of questions too. So in the slide where we are seeing the number of students, number of suspensions, and it has the number 64. So what sort of interventions are we doing or are we putting in place to see to intervene with those students who are habitually being suspended, right? So because it looks like those numbers are something that we can grapple, right? So once a kid, I mean, we had 22, for example, 22 students that had been suspended 5 times, right? So that's a number we can work with. 721 is a lot, right? That's anyone could be suspended for whatever, right? But once we start seeing a pattern in these habitual suspensions, what sort of systems in place do we have to make sure that the students are being looked out? Because one of the things we've seen in closed session is that by the time they get to us for expulsion, we've seen this habitual pattern before, right? So I'd like to hear what sort of interventions do we have in place, or if we don't, we start looking at it, making sure that we capture these students that have been habitually suspended, and starting earlier, right? Because it looks like we have some numbers at the elementary level, which is kind of weird. But anyway, so can someone answer that question? Thank you.
Yes. So whether one of the things that I like to, quote my good friend Kesa over here, is I like to think of everything in the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 kind of model. And so when we look at how are we intervening with students that tend to be coming up and we hear their name over and over, on that tier 1 level is how are we identifying who these students are before they ever get to the level of needing these kinds of interventions, whether we are doing high quality instruction, engaging them in activities that are outside the classroom, because we know that connected students show their distress less. So getting them onto Teams, getting them connected with a check-in, check-out with a trusted mentor, whether it's a peer mentor or an adult mentor, those are the kind of tier 1 interventions. When that student has risen to that level a couple of times, we may be looking at school-based referrals, such as connecting them with our restorative specialists or our school-based therapists. We may be engaging an IEP or a 504 team in considering what they need. And we may be looking at some sort of systemic changes, preferential seating, those kinds of interventions that can be done right at school, right in the classroom. For those students that are still coming up again, we may even be looking at outside referrals through our partnership with programs like Keeping Kids in School or the City of Santa Rosa, the partnership, formerly known as the Violence Prevention Partnership or VPP. We have these kinds of connections of outside organizations that can partner with our students. Our hope is to better systematize so that no matter what student we're talking about, we're able to point to What did we do at the tier 1 level? What did we do at the tier 2 level? What did we do at the tier 3 level to be able to support those students? We know that every school is hungry for just a few more resources. And that is one of the struggles that we do face. Yeah, it's that positive behavior intervention, PBIS. We drop this term all the time. So it's a really fun little website that says, your child is acting in these ways. Have you tried? And it's got this list of here, 47 different interventions, and here's how long to try them, and here's the resources that you might need. So getting those kinds of ideas out of the office into the classroom is going to be our most effective stretch.
And lastly, what are we doing to make sure that we integrate the families with support services? Because sometimes, the families may lack that ability to get those support services that they may need. I'm looking at that kid who's been suspended, 9, 10 times, right? That's, so we need to have a whole team of folks, making sure that, those kids feel supported, right? And not only them, but the families. So, can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, we do have a number of, within each of those levels that I talked about, there are some interventions that really do target the whole family. So when we're looking, I'll go backwards because the one that popped up at the top of my head was the tier 3. Some of the referrals that we make through the partnership are directed at the student. Some of those referrals are directed at the family to support the family in ways that wrap services around them. And this morning in the policy conversation that we were talking about, it's not just the schools that are talking about wrapping around our families, it's our entire community. And we were talking about the need for increased parental forums, not parent training classes as though we hold all the answers, but parent forums where parents can come together, talk not only with us as equals and partners, but talk and learn from each other as well. There's some pockets of excellence through CPI, and there is the Parent Project that is a partnership program that Parent Project is actually offered in both English and in Spanish, so no translation needed, which is a wonderful program. Within our schools, each of our schools is looking at kind of revamping and strengthening the parent community piece. You saw that in the data with our Youth Truth. One of the things that we've been really reflecting on is capturing parent engagement in a more authentic way, because a lot of times when people talk about parent engagement, they use a sign-in sheet at an event. And participation is one way that parents engage. But we can also look at the parents who join us at the policy table. That's a different way to engage. Or the parents who encourage their students appropriately. That's a different way. Or the parents who are teaching their children how to behave. That's a different way. So looking at ways to engage our parents in ways that are a little more authentic and a little less, this is the way you should look when you come to our schools, I think is important. Other? Yeah.
Director Medina.
Thank you. I have a couple things. First, I'm curious as to what is the cutoff date on these figures for this year?
Last Friday.
Okay.
Was it
Yeah.
May
That's fine.
16th, no, May 15th or something?
Thank you. I think I'd also like for the future to also see some of the data compared to some of our previous years, but because, I don't know, I felt like maybe this year we've been experiencing a lot more behavioral issues than other years, and I want to make sure that it's not just imaginary. So I would like to see some of that data. I don't know how we can look at some of those students that were suspended, 2, 3, 4 times. One of the things that has arisen in terms of some of my conversations with folks is about wait times for services like restorative specialists. And looking into how many of these students were maybe on a wait list waiting for services, and then maybe they ended up being suspended or something again as they waited for services. So in terms of our ability to serve these students, caseloads for our staff, and are we being effective? I don't know how we can get to that.
I'll take the first part. I'm going to put a pin on the comparison year to year because I'm getting there in the next section. So if let me know if I don't address your question then, and then we can circle back. Doing a comparison beyond 2020 is a little bit difficult because, as you know, in 2020 we weren't in school. And so I can already tell you that we experienced very few suspension, I think in the teens. And that was because, students weren't physically in school. And so we'll need to go all the way back to 2019 or 18. And again, those were years that were tough for our community too, because of the wildfires. And so I really want to do a longitudinal analysis, but given everything that has happened, it's a little bit difficult. And then I'll pass on for December.
And you are asking the same questions that we ask ourselves when we consider, do we have enough insert intervention here for the number of students in need? I think that we would all very accurately say, no, please more. So you can insert whatever noun you'd like there. Do we need more school-based therapists to be able to help our students? Potentially. We also need more tier 1 interventions so that we need fewer tier 3 interventions. So whatever you ask, do we need more restorative specialists? Yes, and we need more restorative practices being done by every single human at the school so that the number of people who need to go to the restorative specialist drops because everyone is getting those restorative practices. So I think of it like the support sandwich. Yes, we need more humans and we need more institutionalization of these positive behavioral interventions before the child gets into the need for reaction and response. That's been one of the things that we've been talking about for longer than I've been wearing this hat, is how do we respond before the child's in need so that we have fewer people waiting in line for those tier 3 interventions.
But I think what I'm specifically looking at is to see if we're able to look at those that were suspended multiple times. If they were waiting for services when they recommitted or were resuspended, had they not yet been served? That's kind of what I'm interested in being able to see. And I don't know if we have that ability, but I would like to see that.
I think that we can. I think that one of the things, in order to have more accurate information, we are in the early phases of full implementation of ARIES. And so the more we train our staff in using those ARIES document modules, we will be able to better track how long a student may have been waiting for those interventions in a more granular way. So yes, we can begin to pull that data as the years go on, and as we are using ARIES with more fidelity, we will get cleaner. We'll be able to answer your question more specifically and cleaner.
And simultaneously, like what has been the wait time, or how long has it taken for a student to receive services once they've been identified or referred, just so we could have an idea.
Right, correct.
Director Delatorre.
Thank you all very much for the data. First and foremost, just concerned and alarmed. We have discussions on suspension. It's not the first response. And there are multiple categories to not suspend right away. And yet the unfortunate reality is some students have repeated offenses to cause multiple suspensions. So what do they do to get to that point where you have multiple suspensions? Now, as a school community, they're looking at students that have had multiple suspensions and continue to reoffend. So what can we do? Where are we finding the proper identification to hold accountability? We can interact with the families, but if that interaction is falling on deaf ears, how are we truly helping that student? And to help that student is going to help the rest of the student body on that campus. It's heartbreaking to see numbers where we have 5 suspensions, 6 suspensions, 8 suspensions. What's going on in that situation? It can't all be on the school, but it is on the community. And how do we play our part to better assist those students to get some help in that situation?
Right. So when we are talking about the students that are reoffending, if they have not done one of the incidents that would bring you to an immediate expulsion, there is another process that could rise to the potential expulsion, in that there is a limited number of days that a child can face a suspension at school. And once a child has faced 20 days of suspension at school, there is a subsequent recommendation for expulsion, because we have by that point exhausted means of correction. Sometimes you have students who, due to the specific or unique nature of who they are, what other supports they may have, aren't getting large numbers of suspension days. They may get a single day here, a single day there. So when you see somebody who might have 10 different incidents, that may be 10 different single day interventions. Other students may only have 2 or 3, but because each one of those were so serious, they may have been suspended for 5 days at a time. And so they may get to that max number of 20. But once a student hits 20, and in some cases, because they may have done a mandatory much faster than that, we do have to hit the point at which we say, it is time to find this child a different location for them to be learning. And that sometimes is done through the expulsion process.
Director De La Cruz. Let's see. I want to go back to the slide on racial disproportionality.
It's the T, there we go.
Yeah, there we go. The one that jumps out at me is the one that where there's the greatest disproportionality and also the smallest number of students in our entire district. And so, like, there are 113 kids that could literally fit in this room. What are we doing for all 113 kids that are at the highest level of risk for discipline in our system?
There's a variety of different interventions, and each school may be targeting students slightly differently about how to, we often use that phrase, search and serve. So how do we find the students before they're in need and provide them the additional supports? Some of those supports are done through adult connections. Some are done through engaging those students in pro-social activities. But as you can see by this data on this slide, we need to be doing more. And no one will sit here and tell you that clearly we're doing enough, because the data does speak for itself.
Can I add to that? Please. So in addition to what Stacy shared, this is why we have additional support staff who are actually going out and connecting in our community with our families. They're going to appointments. They're linking in additional resources that are particular to the community of the population that we are looking at, which takes a lot of time. And we do have limited resources when it comes to those individuals, but we are doing that more intense work. Sorry.
Thank you for that. That feels like a particular thing that we can't, the scope of it, it means that we can wrap our hands around it or wrap our arms around it in a different kind of a way. Let's see. The other thing that I wanted to, and I want to preface this by saying that in no way am I wanting to, I'm just gonna ask my question. Is there a way in which we look at this data and understand where the discipline is coming from? You know, is it a particular person who is having a hard time with kids who are behaving in a way that makes it difficult for them to feel like they're in control, and what supports? So I guess one, does the data show us where the discipline is coming from? Okay.
It can. One of the things that I kind of obliquely referenced a few moments ago was the need for increasing training on how we can collect this data so that when we mine the data, it is much more accurate. A number of months ago, we ran some similar data because talking about this specific question is not something that we only do here at the board meetings. This is something that we have been working with our assistant principals. We meet monthly. And one of the things that we have done repeatedly is let's open your discipline dashboard. Let's ask a specific question. You sit with your elbow partner, open this, and ask yourself 3 questions about this. What are you seeing? How does this information match up with who you are? And one of the things that we had kind of a nice little giggle about is that when we ran some of the data, we realized the #1 period of time in which discipline incidents happen is midnight. And we all thought, what do you mean midnight? And we realized that if a staff member who is writing a piece of discipline into Aries doesn't hand enter what time that incident happened, it defaults to midnight. And so if you then go and you run a time as what's your hotspot, what's the prime time, and you didn't actually enter the data, you're not going to be able to get that. But that's something that Aries has a lot of built-in tools that can help with that. They have this one particular tool that I love called the hot list, because if we were to have the question of, would it benefit your school to have additional campus supervision on your campus? And if we weren't able to give you a full-time person, but we gave you a part-time person, what time of day would you want an extra person on your campus? Or where on your campus is the place that you could strategically put somebody to maybe intervene? And if they're not collecting that data into Aries, when they run that report, it'll say that the best time to have an extra person is at midnight, and it will probably be in the quad because it's going to default if we don't put the data in there. So part of this is not just looking at the data, but ensuring that we are collecting authentic data as we are having these incidents happen, so that when we go back and mine, we are actually hearing what's happening.
I'm gonna ask my question a little bit differently. Is there a hot list of school staff that we can wrap resources around to support response to situations that create discipline?
So technically, we can see data that because we can drill down to the site level, and if we look at a particular student, we can see, sorry, that's okay. We can see who the referrers are. We don't have, I just want to be careful, we have not created a hot list because we are working with our administrators who supervise our staff on how we weave in these conversations through that coaching that they do with their staff. So the answer is yes, we don't have a hot list, but we are working with our administrators on how they can work with their staff.
I chose that link.
Sorry.
I chose that language purposely because that feels like crap to be on a hot list, right? And I chose that language because that's how we're talking about our kids, right? But we're not talking about our own responsibilities in the system in the same way. And I want to make sure that in this is nothing about blame but it is about a question of where can we put supports in place to support folks who feel that that's what they have at their hands is, you know what, out. Because I think with so many of these situations, what we see is that that's actually not a solution. And when you talk to people who feel like that's the only thing that they have for them, they're also distraught at that being the only option that's left for them, right? And so again, I chose that inflammatory language because that's what it is, right? Okay. I think you answered this, but I'm just wondering, you know, after suspension, is there a direct referral that goes in and looks at an IEP, a 504? And if not, do we have any referrals in our system that give students and families the opportunity to talk to an education advocate that might help them to use language that unlocks certain things in our system that people who tend to be more well-resourced or, you know, speak the same language that we do know the magic words to unlock certain resources? So I'm just wondering, like, those next steps into additional resources, and then how do we make sure that, you know, following up on Ed's question, that those resources are being distributed equitably?
Right.
And if they're not, like, how can we get that advocacy and support to ensure that those folks are getting that?
Yes, so one of the processes that couple with suspension is the readmission or the reentry process. And when a child is suspended, whether it is an in-school suspension or an at-home suspension, there is that expectation that upon reentry to the classroom, that there is some intentionality behind that reintegration. If this is a student who is additionally supported either through individualized education plans or 504s, generally the thought and the question is there something in this 504 or IEP that needs to be adjusted? And so asking those questions as the child is reintegrating, not just should I sit with an administrator and say, I've reflected, I know what I've done wrong, I promise not to do it again, but who else needs to be in that conversation? And so what we've been working on as a community is a conversation not only with the administration about how do we formalize that reentry process, but formalizing that reentry process through all interruptions that come to instruction. So whether this is a student who had an instructional interruption due to discipline or due to a hospitalization or due to any sort of instructional interruption, as they come back in, making sure that it is the full team approach of supporting that student, having the case manager, having the English learner teacher, having the counselor, having the parent be a part of that reintegration. That's an area that we could better formalize, and conversations have already begun on how do we restructure that reentry process to ensure that in the heat of the moment, we are noticing who's not at the table and inviting them there.
My last question is one around specifically the kind of mandatory expulsion areas, and it's particularly around sexual assault. And it's come to my attention that we have that I have been shared specific information about multiple students who have come to district admin with sexual assault allegations that have not been investigated to the satisfaction of the complainant. And have resulted in, I would say, kind of repeated amounts of trauma for the person who didn't feel like they had any restoration, any reparation, any consequence to having raised this. And so I'm wondering, is there a way that we're also tracking what comes to us and then making sure that that is investigated all the way through with some report back to the complainant regarding the allegations? This is kind of like the pre-discipline stuff, right? And this is a particular area of concern for me as a woman with a daughter in the district, exactly. And so I just would love to hear a little bit about that particular process and yeah.
So what you're referencing is really not only addressed through California Ed Code and the board policy and the administrative regs, but that also falls directly under Title IX, which is federal policy around how we are responding to these. And one of the things that is critical as a district is to ensure that the people who are closest to the situation get repeated, annual, reliable training in the best way to respond when these reports come to the schools. What falls under the purview of a school to investigate? What are the moments at which we need to immediately engage our community partners, whether that is programs like the Santa Rosa Police Department or the Sonoma County Sheriff, or CPS, depending on situations, or programs like Verity in our community, which is victim support and victim rehabilitation and wrap services for people who may have either experienced or observed in the home these types of situations. It is something that you can't do the training once. It has to be repeated. And so one of our investments as a school community is ensuring that at the very beginning of the year, and then in our regular meetings, to bring back this concept of when a child comes to you and says this, who are you going to immediately call? Who are you going to engage? And what are going to be your next steps? And that is something that we must continue to prioritize annually. It cannot be, because I know that all of our staff have to do the annual mandatory employee trainings. This is different. This is a completely different set. And we brought this year 9 staff members to Title IX training. At the beginning of this year, we primarily focused on either assistant principals who were new to the district or less experienced in their job. And then following that training, we did some collaborative conversations. Is there more we need to do? 100%, absolutely. Because it's not just about being a woman in this community, it's about being a member of this community and being safe and knowing that the people you care about are safe.
My last question was around the use of that K defines code in 9 through 12 suspensions. Do you have numbers on that, as well as broken down, disaggregated by race?
They are coming up. I do not have them disaggregated by race, but I can give them to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm curious about that.
Actually, I do. I'm sorry. Yes, we will review them. Sorry.
Director Sheffield?
You asked many wonderful questions. So I don't have a question. I guess I just want to go back to that last slide because there's something that's really hard to see, and it is something that we must all think about. Especially it makes me think about some recent use of the terms good kid and bad kid. Mm-hmm. And we've heard that at our board meetings, and we try to stop that as it's being said. And we really want to, definitely address that as it is being said, because when you look at these numbers on this slide, and there's a story there. You know, we know this, there's a story there. You can look at suspension rates, you can look at expulsion rates, you can look at youth incarceration rates, and there's a lot of parallels there as well. And when we look at this, we just have to be really careful about the, you know, the label that these suspensions are going to put on kids, especially really visible kids, 1 in 8, 1 in 11. You know, these are the kids that are at our schools and they receive a label, and that label carries with them. It might be a suspension, then it might be 2 or 3 suspensions, or it might jump up to 5, 9, and then it gets into expulsion, and then it gets into incarceration. And it all started with that 1 in 8, you know, that 1 in 11. So just wanted to point that out. Be obvious.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sheffield.
Let me go to the next phase of question rounds. Let's stop sharing the screen unless there's a direction to look at.
Yeah, we'll do that.
So we can hear, see people.
We can move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. So now the next set of slides is going to deal with what are students suspended for. So here I present data that shows the number of suspension by a code violation. And here you can see that 80% of all the incidents fall within the top 5 violation categories. And as you can see here, 2 or 3 of them are one of those mandated suspensions. You know, A1, A2, and C. 48900K is our 4th most common suspension, 134 incidents, and then harassment is our 5th most. The rest of the rest 20% is distributed across all other codes. So for the rest of the presentation tonight, we're going to focus on these 5 most common suspensions. One thing I also want to point out is that these just report what we call the primary suspension code. So that is what the administrator indicates in ARIS, in our student information system, as the reason why they were suspended, for the primary reason. But administrators usually also pair the primary code with secondary, tertiary, and so on codes that can indicate up to 5. So even if defiance here is indicated as the primary code, these are usually paired with other codes. So, but they are indicated as secondary to the suspension. So going back to the comparison across years, here I present data that compares this year to last year. So 2021-22 with 22-23 school years on the top 5 suspended categories. And here you can see that across the board, we do see an increase in the number of suspensions for all these 5 codes. And when we calculate them, it's a 60% increase year to year. So to give you a sense of this, it means that last year, 495 students were suspended because they caused physical injury to another student. This year, the same incidents resulted in 82 suspensions, and so on for all other categories. Now, going back to the questions about disaggregation by ethnicity, you can see that we do see some differences in the patterns of suspensions for students that identify as Hispanic or Latino and white. And here, Hispanic and Latino are in blue, and the red bar is for white students. Specifically, you can see that our Latino students are more likely to be suspended for the physical injury violation versus our white students are more likely to be suspended because they are under the influence of an intoxicant. Similarly, our Latino students are more likely to be suspended for a defiance primary code. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and we can take questions.
I noticed that the slide on kind of disaggregated by race data only breaks it down to Latinos or Latinx kids. Is that because the sample size is so small for for Native American and Black kids that we are not showing them?
That's right. I didn't want to identify possible students in this report, but we can provide data because we have the data. It was also for brevity for tonight because it would have been too many bars. And so I didn't want, the message, to get lost.
So is there a way of presenting the proportionality of those students without identifying them individually? Like, is there a way for us to say like 8-to-1 or 4-to-1 for Black and Native American students?
Possibly by suspension category. So basically say within this suspension category, we know that, 1 in 8, like now I'm riffing, right? 1 in 8 were in this group, 1 in 2 were in this other group. So I could provide that data if it's interesting.
I would really like to see it. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the slides again. So these are the slide on suspension rates by ethnicity, those top 5. This is at the high school level only, or this is throughout the entire district?
This is throughout the district across all grade levels.
Across, okay. And so are we seeing disproportionality at every stage, elementary, middle school, and high school, or does it increase at some stage, or does it start as it starts in elementary and then it just continues all the way through? Like, I'm curious about what we see, similar to the youth truth and the panorama studies, right? Elementary school kids are happy and yay. Is that true for Black, Native American, Latino kids when it comes to discipline, right? So I'm curious about how we understand the progression of students' experiences with suspension based on who they are.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do not know the answer off the top of my head, but I can provide it to you in an informational item.
Director Flores, your hand is up.
I'll agree. You took all my questions. So great questions. Going back.
We have lost
Director
you.
Flores, you muted yourself.
There. Can you hear me now? Sorry. I was saying that Director De La Cruz took a lot of the questions I was going to ask. Great questions. Going back to the same slide that Director De La Cruz mentioned, I believe it's slide 47. So 48,900K, right? There seems to be a big disproportionality here. I mean, that's what 85% of the kids that get suspended, are in that category, right? Are Latinx, Latino, or Hispanic students, right? And yet, this is one of the categories that it's not a mandatory, sort of suspension, right? So is there a reason as to why 48,900K was one of the top 5? I mean, it's top 3. Do we have any idea as to why that is? I mean, is it because kids are these the habitual, students that keep doing the same sort of thing and reoffending? So can you elaborate a little bit about that one?
I think it would be important rather than speculating. I think it would be essential to actually go into the data and look specifically as to whether these were situations in which there was an intentional coding of defiance, or whether that was an enhancement, that was a secondary that was added in there. One of the, when they talk about primary, I don't know, and you may be able to help us with this. I don't think Aries will go through when you pull the code and they will evaluate. You just listed 3 codes. The third one you entered is actually the most serious. It's what did you enter first? And so it may be that when we look at K as a primary, it may be that the child's behavior in that moment was first seen as defiant and second seen as a possession of controlled substance. It could be that as the administrator was entering it, they just happened to put K first and C second. And so I don't want to sit here tonight and speculate why are there Ks until we are able to accurately say of the, I don't have the number, of the 126 K violations, 87 of them were primary and 14 of them were only K. And then we're able to get a more accurate piece of information. So I don't know that we are necessarily prepared to answer that level of granularity to your question. It is something that we can explore.
Thank you.
Director Medina.
Thank you. You just mentioned enhancements, and I was just curious if, well, first off, I assume that within all this suspension data is included all those that were eventually expelled. But in terms of enhancements, I'm wondering about the potential for like enhancements being added to potentially lead to expulsion. Is that something that is a thing? And can we learn more about those numbers?
I want to be, I want to be careful about my language, because sometimes when we use a word like enhancement, it can carry meaning in ed code that might be different than penal code. And I want to make sure that nobody misunderstands that I'm using a term that might be used in a different context. K is not expellable. If a site brought us a recommendation for expulsion, and because my first question is always, what is the California Ed Code charge that is associated with this? If they said K, I hand it back to the school, because we do not expel for K. K is not eligible for an expulsion. And if you brought a case to hearing, and if K was even included, there must be a separate write-up by both the school and by the panel who hears the case, addressing how was K even a mention here. So I'm not concerned that you are seeing cases of expulsion that are associated with K. We have way too many stopgaps that would be put into place before that. So if K is the only argument, you're not hearing it, because it's not allowed to come to the question of expulsion. I hope that that answered the question. Yeah, it absolutely could be contributing to the suspension, but it would not be the argument for a case for expulsion.
Yeah, I think it was just because earlier, I think you mentioned that for expulsion, there needed to be more than just one thing. And so it was because of that led me to ask the question.
No, understood. Those secondary findings are either that the school has attempted a variety of means of intervention that have failed, or that intervention isn't feasible due to the nature of the act. The second secondary finding is whether or not that child poses an ongoing physical danger. So saying that the student was defiant or disruptive is not one of the secondary findings. They have to pose an ongoing physical danger, or there must have been other means of correction that have been attempted and did not work, or that due to the nature of what happened, it just simply wasn't feasible to intervene in any other way.
And the other question that I have is, it appears these numbers are incident based, right? So I'm curious in terms of number of students where maybe one student had 10 incidents, so it's a lower number of students. And if that's a data point that we might also be able to see.
Yes, we can provide the data. Yeah.
Director Delatorre.
Obviously, a lot of time and energy has gone into this, and I think it's really important as we're looking at data and numbers. We really need to continue to look at these incidents as what happened and try and get to the root of why it happened and get those students help. When we break it down ethnically and decide who it's happening to, it can sometimes cloud the vision. Obviously, we have a larger number of Latino students in our population. So if we have a higher number of incidents, it may be because there's a higher population of students. So as far as data points, those numbers are going to look higher. So when you present us with percentages, those percentages are higher. So these are great cultural references to look through and see if we can get to the root of what's happening. But it's really important that with all this disciplined data, we're looking at what was disciplined so we can help identify why that discipline needed to take an effect and get to the root of the problem. The who is really important, and we really need to dig into that and make sure everybody's getting help as much as we can. But if these incidents are happening, we've got to identify what those are and why they're happening.
Thank you, Director Delatorre. Director Medina.
Yeah, I think I just want to reemphasize, just kind of in response to Director Delatorre. To me, this data on who it's happening to in terms of ethnic breakdown is really, really important, just as it relates to equity in what we've seen historically happen. So I definitely like the fact that we're also focusing on this. Of course, the reasons why is important, but I think we need to make sure that we're at least having this data, being aware of what's happening so we can recognize patterns. Thank you.
Director Flores.
And a question to the staff. I mean, can you briefly talk about the significance of disproportionality and how that takes into effect in here and as to why we are, disaggregating data with by ethnicity?
Yeah, we have looked into significance of the disproportionality across groups. Unfortunately, some of our groups are very small, as some of you have already pointed out. And so the error bar that we get around it is very, very big. So meaning that there is no significant difference, whichever group we choose to be the normative group. And the bigger groups are the significant ones. So that's why I chose not to include them, because they pretty much go hand, significance and sample size go hand in hand. So it's a little bit difficult then to really see, like disaggregate whether or not is significance because it's actually a different way the students experience our system, or it's just because we have more students and it's just easier to have significant result when we have 9,000 students versus 113. So that's why I haven't included it, but I can provide it as part of the follow-up informational item, a breakdown and significant levels for all the differences.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Any other board member questions? Okay, we can continue. Thank you.
All right, everybody, we are coming to the home stretch of our presentation tonight. We wanted to take a step back and talk about the way that we have organized, and this slide is a very similar slide to, I think I remember presenting this slide to the board from my garage, my office in my garage, early pandemic. We came and we started talking about the way we wanted to organize our multi-tiered system of social emotional supports when we started talking about universal screening, when we started talking about these types of things. And before I jump into this, I kind of want to say that we're here as part of a data culture that we're trying to build. And that's been something that's been clear from our leadership. And we are not here because we want to defend all of this data as just and right and appropriate. We are here because this stuff keeps us up at night. Okay, there are findings that we are pulling. We're coming tonight to present to you mental health, social emotional data during the nation's biggest teen mental health crisis. It should not feel good. We are coming and talking to you and showing you increases in places that should be going down. We have had the hardest discipline year than I can and any of our staff have remembered, and we're presenting data about that. And we have actual measurements of that. And so, like, as we've gone through all that, and it's been 3.5 hours now, we're like, that's it? Yeah, almost. We're at that place of like, okay, so this is the way our system is organized. And then let's talk a little bit about some of the policy implications maybe, and maybe some of the programmatic implications. So we can see here that, and I don't necessarily know if I need to read through all this, but I just want to point out that we've come a long way, and we have mental health capacity that we could have only dreamed about. Even when I met with you all the first time, we didn't have the program that we had. We weren't providing the level of interventions that we provided. We stand on a really great a lot of shoulders of people that have been working to make things better at Santa Rosa City Schools, but we still have a lot of work to do. So I think I'll turn it over to you and not go through each one of these.
Yeah.
Oh, this is you. I know.
No, this is me.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is me.
Sorry.
So it's okay. I really want to echo what Eric just shared, because we're not trying to hide anything. This is very hard data to look at and to understand, and know that there are realms of influence that I personally don't have control over, but will give everything to try and figure out how we can make change. And data is one way that we can begin to uncover and understand what is happening. This team has been phenomenal in being vulnerable about what we understand and what we don't. And we've had an excellent coach with Dr. Tracy Benson working with us and working with our team to help us be in that space. And we're going to grow this opportunity to be able to understand what's going on in our systems so that we become a systematic, I don't even know how to say it, data-driven. And that is how we make decisions. That is how we budget. That is how we inform our practices and make decisions about what else we need to do or make changes. So I just want to commend the team. Along with this work in looking at data is how we look at our policies. And this is just a cross-section of a variety of policies that all currently exist that we are going to have to put under a magnifier to see what practices we have said we've put in place through our administrative regulations and what more we need to highlight. Because unless it becomes in writing in many cases, it is a question of whether it is policy or practice that actually sticks and becomes a part of our regular being in our system. So that is going to take some time, but we are committed to start doing that in the next few months so that we can bring forward, as we're already navigating the potential of practice changes, how our policy matches that, so that we can be very clear about expectations from the board in how we navigate our work. There are definitely more policies than are outlined here that we are also going to be looking at, especially when it comes to accountability and growing. And I really want to just also echo what Trustee De La Cruz mentioned, in that we spend a lot of time looking at students, and we also need to look at adult practice, because that is how we balance and eliminate disproportionality. And we do have bias in our district. We have bias inherently as human beings to start. So working with the adults in our system on expectations and how we move forward so that they understand the supports that are in place for them to be safe and to have classrooms that are safe, campuses that are safe, and students who can manage their safety as well, to regulate that as members of our school community, that it is not one-sided or arrows in one way, but that our students have a responsibility as well to understand what is expected of them to help contribute to a safe school campus and a safe community. In our work with the Violence Prevention Partnership, or now the partnership, we are looking at how we work with outside organizations so that when we talk about community, it is not just the hours of when school opens and when it closes, but anywhere our students are in our community, so that there is a shared accountability for what is happening with our students. Just the other night, as I was coming back from work, almost around 11-ish, I noticed 4 young students, young people, congregating on a sidewalk, and they looked to be about elementary age. And it was 11 o'clock at night, and they were sitting on a sidewalk outside a gas station along a busy street. And the inherent response in me was, as a parent, I wanted to stop and say, "Are you okay?" But I also had a fear, to be very honest with you, of whether my help would be received in a way that would be healthy for these young people who were out, conducting their own business, right? So I think we as a community need to ask ourselves those questions at a very tumultuous time, right? As a society, of how we respond to each other and how we magnify supports and services that are available in multiple spaces. So we will be looking at these policies and others and making sure that we are clear about expectations, and also leverage in additional practices that we are doing that might not be reflected in those guidelines. And I think I'm handing it to Kesa next. Or Eric, one of you.
I'm a proud member of the Safety Advisory Roundtable, and I'm excited because a lot of these pieces that are on this list are things that I get to support in the district, and things that I look at a lot, but I really am excited when these words come out of other people's mouths, when I hear other people asking for and talking about restorative practices, or what's that PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports. And I have to remember that some people don't really know what these things are. But I wanted to bring up that 10 years ago, there was a steering committee that was looking at disproportionality in our district of suspensions. And the committee came up with 3 things, and they happened to be, I think, on this list, more or less. It was looking at positive behavioral interventions and supports, restorative practices, social emotional learning was sort of baked into the PBIS. And then something that was like, elevating student voice, like a safe school ambassadors type. So on this list, wellness centers are talking, other people besides Eric are talking about wellness centers, and people want them from students, staff, administrators, and families. So this is a long list. I won't read every item, but it's neat that a lot of people across our district and community are mentioning things that they think might be helpful. And it feels reassuring that there's some pieces that we have a pretty decent foundation in, but we definitely need to do more training because of turnover and because of, it really costs a lot of money to train almost 2,000 employees. And so we had to decide where we would go with, focusing budgetary considerations.
More time for questions. Director Medina.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the great presentation of all this information. First, I'd like to start just simply by saying that, while I've only served on this board, it's my 5th year, I've seen a lot of this change over I'd say about 11, 12 years passes when a lot of this has begun, and I've seen it slowly and slowly progress. I've seen a lot of resistance to change, but I feel like we're making a lot of progress, and that makes me feel good. I feel we still have a long way to go. But recently, one of the things that I heard back in terms of feedback is that many people aren't aware of a lot of these supports that exist and that they're out there. So what are we doing to make people more aware of these services and how they can ask for help? That's my question.
I'm not sure this is going to be an answer to this, or if this is even appropriate. And if it's not, I apologize. The reality of the scaling of some of our services is such that the people knowing about them in some ways is a feature, not a bug, or not knowing about them. Because if everybody knew that there was one school-based therapist available to 1,500 people, like we have a process that we're using to allocate that finite resource. Everybody should definitely know that social emotional learning or that mental health hygiene or mental health first aid that's scalable for everybody. And so when someone, and I'm the guy who's building the mental health program, and so obviously I feel really terrible when someone comes to me and says, at our listening session, someone said they didn't know that we had school-based therapists. And then I realized, oh, I never intended to make this something that was universally available, because a one-to-one therapy session by definition cannot happen for everybody. Let's try to, and so that's why we're making proposals that involve full-scale multi-tiered implementations. Does that make sense on how maybe it's not the worst thing when someone says, I didn't know about that? Because we just aren't going to build a capacity to give everybody a one-on-one therapist for that type of service. And we need to do so much better of a job in our community and our school district to communicate the resources and services that are available. And again, though, it's a time when those resources and services are scarcely available. It is a widespread crisis. So I'm not sure that answered that.
Little bit about
Yeah, wow.
I think there's something there that is the potential for.
Yes, sir, Mike.
Oh, I'm not sure that, okay. I'm going to go ahead and so we are going to add a little bit here. Our district is beginning to engage in a process supported through SCO and the California Department of Education to look at the feasibility of implementing what's called the California Community Schools model, California Community Schools model. And it is a program, and I almost brought the 4 pillars here so that I could vamp on it. But basically what the California Department of Education is asking us to do is to extend the definition of our school sites to include more learning opportunities for students and families, to open our spaces to community resources, and to develop way more partnerships with the community resources that co-locate and collaborate. In this version of a wellness center, as we conceive it in the future, it's not just going to be Santa Rosa City School staff working there. We're going to have County Office of Education staff working there. We're going to develop partnerships, win-win partnerships, not necessarily vendorized partnerships, but win-win partnerships with serving agencies in the community so that they can gain access to the students that we always have access to. It also involves a collaborative leadership model where decisions are made within the framework of parent and family engagement and involvement. I would definitely direct everybody to the Department of Education's website to learn more about it. Now that I'm talking about it, I'm guaranteeing that we are going to be presenting this as an item in the future. We will also have to do so in order to, I think, receive permission to begin drawing down the $200,000 that we are slated to receive from the Department of Education.
And I'd add that I love to hear that we're on that route. I remember around 2014 with the then assistant superintendent at Kitamura, we were having a conversation around community schools. And one of the real big things that I'm concerned about that I think we will need to also look at is facilities and availability of facilities for where we can host all these different programs. But I just want to say again, thank you for the presentation. And I appreciate that perspective on why people might not know of programs.
Director Sheffield.
Just wanted to bring up something Case had said about the program considerations, and you had brought up, and this was something we did in the past, and the elevating student voices and how important that is, and how important we're seeing that now. And I've just had so many conversations this year, so many conversations just in the last maybe 2 months of the school year, with parents who, they're not angry or frustrated. They're sad because their child had an issue that they didn't talk about, an issue that had been going on the entire year, and finally it sort of came out. And when the parents press the student, well, why are you telling me this now? And the students, well, what was going to happen? Who would I have told? And the students don't know that we actually listen, that we are actually here for them. And maybe it's something that happened, when our students were distance learning, when they weren't on campus, they forgot that skill, or they didn't develop that skill, and they didn't know that an issue shouldn't be allowed to continue. And so, that's part of that. Maybe there's a way, as we're looking at program considerations, there's a way that we can give a little bit more power to our students, or maybe teach them or reteach them the skill of speaking up and calling things out when they see that. Not pull out your phone and record a fight, in the moment that it's happening, but actually hear what you're, or express what you're feeling. Or if you're being bullied, we need to give our students that power back. And so I'm glad that, Casey, you brought that up.
Are there other? Director De La Cruz? I'm just super grateful. I'm super overwhelmed, super emotional. My kids are in this data. Their experiences I've seen myself, and I'm just really grateful for the sensitivity and the loving care that I felt you brought to every word and every number and percentage that you shared tonight, because it was really humanistic and it was very focused on making sure that our kids are okay. I also really, really want to appreciate the race forward approach. My daughter's a 6th grader, and this is the first year that she has actually started to articulate that she is seeing how different she and her brown friends and her Black friends and her Native friends are being treated in school by their teachers, and how differently they're judged, and that the expectations are different. And she's 11. And, you know, that you and the district are having this focus on a loving, data-rich approach to holding ourselves accountable, to making sure that 11-year-olds don't have to face that reality, or that they are given the tools to be able to kind of call in support and help and love for them to have the same kinds of outcomes that they see their friends and their neighbors and the people that they play with every day and who they love. And they love their teachers. They love their teachers. My daughter loves her teachers. And so it's a really it's a heartbreaking conflict. So I just want to share that I'm here with you, I'm in this. And I guess my question that I would, ask to close this night is if you had one thing that you could ask this board for, and if we had magic wands and unlimited sources of resources, what would that thing be? Just dream with us, right? I love the community schools approach. That makes me super excited. You're we're going to talk about this someday soon, manifest that, Eric. I love watching you manifest stuff. But I just want to ask that question, what in the magic world, in the magic wand world, what's the one thing you want this board to do?
Yeah. No wishes, no repeats.
No whammies.
I think the one size fits all that happens a lot here. I'd like to see us get a little more creative with options for our students. When I hear about what other districts can do, this makes me very emotional. We have a lot of kids that are not graduating, and we did not look at that data tonight. And I know that we talk about it a lot, but I really, I think we will have to get more creative and quickly, because I feel like our kids are feeling disenfranchised. And so it's really easy to decide not to go to school. It's really easy to decide to go ahead and get suspended because that's a vacation from school. So I would look for some alternate cool options and programming that exist out there. And that if we just re-looked at how we use the money that we have, I think that it's possible. And so we have really a lot of smart, creative, and caring people in our district. And I think people would show up to a night meeting without pay to have some input on things like that. So sorry, that's very close to home. So it's lots of kids need us in that way right now.
Can I wish for more wishes? I have said this to you before, that I've wanted to do mental health in a school district for my entire career. And I want to keep doing that. And I want to do it. I want to fully implement that. And I want to have the ability to do so. And I'm realizing, though, that I'm here tonight because that's what I've been given the opportunity to do. So let's just keep working at it. There really aren't any wishes. You can't give me a magic checkbook that I can write from the board. We have real limitations, but we can engage in tactics together to address them. And so I'm not feeling like wishing other than give me more wishes. But let's just keep doing this.
I hate going third because that was, I was going to say what Kesa said. We know that the ugly part of this presentation is where I live. I'm with our students, and somebody asked me once, you always say children. Why do you say children? Some of these are 17, 18, 19 years old. Yes, and they are still children. They are here, and our families trust us. They have given us their very best. And I'm going to stop looking at you because you keep making me cry. Okay. I know. They give us the best people that we have, that they have, and they are the best people that we have. These children are worth our extra efforts. And so our ability to say to our students that if this traditional pathway doesn't work for you, we have something else. If this intervention doesn't work for you, we have something else. We have humans who believe in you and who want to figure out a path for you. And that as a community, we are willing to say, this didn't work today. I've got one more thing I can try. Or not one more thing, maybe 2 or 10 more things that I can try. Because none of our students are, we cannot give up on any of them. You know, everybody's told a little story and somebody said, hey, 80% of my kids are doing great. That's fabulous. Until we can say 100%, we're not done. And so I love the support of time, that we can have these really uncomfortable conversations, not just here with you, but at each one of our schools, that we turn to every single principal and said, where are your students of need shown in your SIPSA? Where is it in your budget? Where is it in your master schedule? You show us where these students are, because these are our students. Every single one of them, flawed, successful, your 4.7s and your 0.7s, they are all our babies. And I love, and so if you're asking what the magic wand, give us time, give us support, and let us be creative, because they need it.
We shouldn't let the data guy go first here. One wish, well, I don't know if you know, but I'm the data guy. So my wishes are going to be about data. I really wish, and I think you might have noticed it tonight, that our data is good in certain places and not as strong in others. So if I had one wish, it would be to have a very good data pipeline from begin to end, so that I can tell you what's really happening, right? With, fidelity and accuracy, so that we can intervene and be able to identify where the problems are and where the successes are, right? Because right now it's sometimes, very good programs or very good successes are falling through the cracks because we don't see them. Or maybe I don't talk with the person that sees them, or maybe, we don't record them. And unfortunately, if they are not recorded somewhere that I can have data, I cannot tell you about it, right? So if we had a magic wand, I would try to, rework or really strengthen our data pipeline, from training of our staff of how do we record data into the system, and now we can support them to do that in, timely fashion, fast and quickly, because they don't need to spend all day in front of a computer filling paperwork, right? Because that's not what we want our staff to do. And then also like tools on how do we put this data in front of our staff to make it actionable. So I think that's more than one wish, but if I can bundle it all in one, and you can make it happen, I'll be very happy.
Well, and finally, recognizing, sorry, I'm going to grab it again, recognizing we don't only have amazing students. We have an incredibly talented staff. And if we can get these amazing, not just the teachers, but the teachers, the administrators, the CSEA, the therapists, the people who stand side by side with our children, we get them the same amount of support that we are talking about offering our students, and we see their talent and magic, and these students come together, we're going to see some real change.
Thank you. And we have a couple more questions. Director De La Torre.
Thank you, team, to the wonderful presentation tonight. And thank you to the board for the passionate discussions we've been able to have this evening on such important topics. As directors, we don't represent just ourselves, we represent communities. So as difficult as it may sound and seem, we have to bring questions to the table, comfortable and uncomfortable, so we can have these deep conversations and we can provide an understanding to the community of why what you guys are doing is so important and why you're doing it the way you're doing it and why it's being presented the way it's presented, because it does matter. One size shoe does not fit all. And we have a variety of sites and a variety of grade levels that we are attempting to represent. What works at one high school will not work at another, and it definitely won't work at an elementary. So we're working on processes of what's going to work collaboratively, what can we make work throughout, how do we bring equitable opportunities to these students to get the help they need so they can continue to grow and thrive. So thank you guys for your work. Thank you, board, for the continued support and passion that we put into this. And it's really it. Just thank you guys. Keep at it.
Thank you. Director Medina.
Yeah, I just wanted to express that as you all spoke, I really felt your passion. And I just want to encourage us all to recognize this has been a very difficult year. And I've seen that in our staff, you know, how they've struggled a lot. And I've received the expression from some of the losing the passion for having gotten in this field. And I want to make sure that we also do all we can to ensure that our staff keep that passion, because it's really passion that drives this work. And so anything we can do in the future to keep that in mind and do what we can to keep an amazing passionate staff to really lift up our students. I'm supportive of. Thank you again for everything today.
Thank you. I just want to say that I've had the pleasure of working with Eric outside of my board capacity as a member of a community organization who is very invested in the well-being of our young people. So I just also want to kind of reiterate and uplift that there are so many people that are invested in this conversation and want to be a part of the solution. So please, lean on community, because we're here to support and to do what we can, because as Director Medina just said, it's passion that drives this work. And there's so many people in our community that are passionate about seeing the next generation of our community thrive and come out of this situation that we're experiencing just so much better. So thank you for all of your work and for the data. And I think, Emanuele, we have to give you a really, really big shout out, because in the past, these presentations have been a little bit harder to digest. So thank you so much for all of your work in making this possible. And before we adjourn this meeting, Superintendent Turnell, any last announcements?
I'm really feeling the care and respect for this conversation. And I do want to highlight that we have real issues that we need to take care of. And there are people who are relying on us to help them. And that's what we're here to do. And it doesn't happen overnight. And we need people's help. If it is only top down, it will only ever be top down. This needs to be a collaborative effort so that we can work together as a team in this system to make sure we're all on the same page. And I look forward to that work.
Thank you. And with that, we will adjourn tonight's meeting. Thank you.